Hi everyone, and welcome to another Paranormal M video. If you enjoy the stories, please give the video a like. And if you've ever had a paranormal experience you can't explain, feel free to send it to me. Tonight's first story is about a family living in a parsonage where unusual things kept happening around the house. At first, most of it happened in one bedroom, but later it spread everywhere. Years after moving out, the storyteller found out that she and her dad had both seen the same creepy figure in the house. Anyway, settle in, relax, and I hope everyone gets a good night's sleep. My father was a pastor, so growing up, my family lived in a parsonage owned by the church. And honestly, that house never felt completely ours. From the moment we moved in, strange things started happening. Doors would swing open or slam shut on their own. Lights would flicker, and sometimes the actual switches would move without anyone touching them. Objects fell from shelves. Beds shook in the middle of the night. We heard low growling from empty rooms, and every now and then, someone would catch a glimpse of a figure that vanished almost immediately. At first, everything seemed centered around my older brother's bedroom. Then my dad prayed over the house and blessed every room. After that, it got worse. It was almost as though whatever lived there had been disturbed, and suddenly the activity spread throughout the entire house. The most frightening thing that happened to me personally took place when I was about 16. I was downstairs in the basement, watching a movie and sitting on the carpet. Across from me was a small bathroom. The door was slightly open, just enough for me to see a narrow strip of darkness inside. I remember looking down at my phone, not really paying attention to the movie, when I suddenly felt watched. It was such a strong feeling that I looked up without even thinking. There was something standing behind the bathroom door. It was tall and unnaturally thin, with dull, grayish-brown skin stretched tightly over its bones. It had no visible muscle, almost like a skeleton wrapped in old leather. One hand was curled around the edge of the door, and its eyes were enormous. They were a sickly yellow color, glowing against the darkness. Its mouth was pulled into this wide, horrible grin, as though it knew exactly how terrified I was. I could not move. It just stared at me, and I stared back. It may have lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Then I blinked, and it was gone. I jumped up, ran across the basement, and slammed the bathroom door shut. Afterward, I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the light from the television had created a shadow. I only told my brother, no one else. About 4 years later, we had moved into another house. That place felt peaceful. Nothing moved by itself. There were no footsteps in empty rooms, and no figures standing in doorways. One evening, I was sitting in the living room with my brother and my dad, sculpting a face out of polymer clay. As I worked, I began to notice that the face looked strangely familiar. Then it hit me. I held it up and said, "This looks exactly like the thing I saw behind the bathroom door." My brother leaned closer and immediately looked disgusted. "That is awful," he said. Then he turned toward our dad. "Dad, look at this." The moment my father saw it, his whole expression changed. "Throw that away," he shouted. "Right now." That reaction shocked both of us. My dad was normally calm and encouraging. Whenever I made something, he would tell me it was creative or ask how long it had taken. He never raised his voice over something like that. So we asked him why he was so upset. He stared at the clay face for a moment, then quietly said, "I saw that thing in the old house." He told us that one night, while we were still living in the parsonage, he woke up and saw what appeared to be my mother walking toward the bathroom beside their bedroom. At first, he thought nothing of it. Then he noticed she was wearing a long robe. My mother did not own a robe. Something about that detail made him reach across the bed. When he did, he felt my mother lying beside him, still asleep. The figure near the bathroom stopped. Then it slowly turned around. As my father watched, its face changed. The shape of my mother disappeared, and underneath it was the same thin, skeletal creature I had seen in the basement. The same stretched skin, the same yellow eyes, the same terrible grin. It moved toward the bed until its face was only inches from his. My dad shut his eyes and began to pray. When he finally opened them again, the room was empty. Until that evening with the clay sculpture, neither of us knew that we had seen the same thing. For years, my father had tried to explain away everything that happened in that house. He said passing trains might have shaken objects from shelves, even though the tracks were nearly 2 miles away. He blamed old wiring for the lights and uneven floors for the doors. He told us that fear could make our imaginations run wild. But after seeing that figure for himself, he stopped trying to explain it. He finally understood that we had not imagined any of it, and whatever had been living in that house had shown itself to both of us. I think I saw Slender Man before I even knew Slender Man existed. And I know how that sounds. Believe me, I do. At the time, I was in my early 50s, and I knew absolutely nothing about creepypastas, internet horror stories, or any of that online folklore. I only learned about it afterward, when I searched for what I had seen. Before I tell you what happened, I should probably make something clear. I don't experience hallucinations. I don't drink, I don't use drugs, and I've never been diagnosed with any kind of condition that would cause me to see things. My life is honestly very ordinary, painfully ordinary some days. This happened one afternoon in late April. I was walking through a wooded area near my home. It had been drizzling for most of the day, and the sky was completely gray. Usually when the weather is pleasant, you'll see dog walkers, joggers, families, people taking shortcuts through the trees. But that day, the woods were almost completely empty. I remember how quiet everything felt. Just the soft rain tapping against the leaves, and the occasional sound of my shoes pressing into the wet ground. Eventually, I turned onto a broad trail that led toward a busy road. From there, it was only a short walk back to my house. Whenever I walk alone, I make a point of checking my surroundings. Nothing dramatic, just basic awareness. So when I stepped onto the trail, I glanced to my right. Far behind me, almost at the other end of the path, there was someone walking in my direction. I assumed it was a man. He was too far away for me to make out much else. I remember thinking that I wasn't the only person foolish enough to go wandering through the woods in miserable weather. So I carried on. Maybe half a minute later, I looked back again. He was much closer. Not slightly closer, much closer. That immediately felt wrong because I hadn't heard anyone running, and when I looked at him, he wasn't rushing at all. He seemed to be walking slowly, almost casually. That was when I started noticing how strange he looked. He was extremely tall and painfully thin. I knew that trail well. I knew the height of the trees and how an average person looked standing beside them at different distances. This figure didn't fit the proportions of the surroundings. He looked too tall to be human. He appeared to be wearing a dark suit. His arms hung unusually low at his sides, and his legs seemed stretched, almost as though someone had taken an ordinary person and pulled them longer. Then there was his head. It was pale and smooth, shaped like a narrow oval above the black suit. At first, I thought the distance or the rain was hiding his face, but the longer I looked, the more certain I became that there was nothing there. No eyes, no mouth, No features at all. Just that pale, empty shape. I turned around and started walking faster. I told myself not to panic. Maybe he was unusually tall. Maybe the weather was distorting what I could see. Maybe he was wearing some kind of hood or mask. But when I checked again, he was closer. His movements were still slow, calm even, yet somehow he was gaining on me. I began speed walking. Then I started jogging. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, he had covered far more ground than seemed possible. His long arms barely moved, and his steps looked unhurried, but the distance between us kept shrinking. That was when fear really took hold of me. I stopped trying to make sense of it and started running. By then, I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. I didn't care how ridiculous I looked. I just wanted to reach the road where there would be cars, houses, and other people. I ran out of the woods and onto the pavement beside the main road. Cars were passing, and the ordinary noise of traffic felt strangely comforting. I kept moving, but I looked back toward the trail. The figure never came out. I watched the opening between the trees as I hurried away, expecting him to appear at any moment. He didn't. Maybe he stepped into the woods. Maybe he disappeared behind the bushes. I honestly don't know. Later, someone suggested that it might have been a person in costume trying to frighten people. I considered that, but it wasn't Halloween. There was hardly anyone around, and the weather was awful. It seemed like a great deal of effort for an audience of one. When I got home, I went online and typed in everything I could remember. Extremely tall man, black suit, pale face, no features, long arms and legs. The results all pointed to the same thing: Slender Man. I stared at the pictures and my stomach dropped. They looked disturbingly close to what I had seen. Then I read that Slender Man wasn't real. He was a fictional character created online. That only made the experience more confusing. I hadn't heard the name before. I had never seen the pictures. I didn't know the stories or the descriptions. So how could I have imagined something that matched them so closely? I know people can misinterpret things, especially when they're frightened. I understand that memory isn't perfect, but I also know what I saw on that trail. Whatever was following me did not look like an ordinary person. Over the years, I've read theories about thought forms, sometimes called tulpas. The idea is that if enough people focus on an image or believe in something strongly enough, it can somehow take on a presence of its own. I don't know whether I believe that explanation, but it's one of the few theories I've found that even begins to make sense. I've also read that Slender Man is usually associated with children, not adults. I was a grown woman, although I am quite short, so perhaps from a distance I looked younger. That's my nervous little joke about it anyway. The truth is, I was feeling low that day. I was emotionally exhausted and more vulnerable than usual. Sometimes I wonder whether that mattered. Maybe it noticed me because of the state I was in. Maybe I was able to see it because my guard was down. Or maybe it was something entirely different, and my mind simply connected it to the closest image I could find. I still walk near those woods, but I don't go there alone when the weather is bad. And every time I pass the entrance to that trail, I look down it, just to make sure there isn't a tall, faceless figure walking slowly toward me. Okay, so this happened one summer when I was living in southern New Jersey. A few of my friends and I had gotten completely wrapped up in ghost hunting. We spent weeks visiting all the places people whispered about. Abandoned foundations in the Pine Barrens, strange roadside landmarks, forgotten cemeteries, and a couple of local legends near the old ironworks. Most nights, nothing really happened. We might hear a branch snap or convince ourselves we saw something move between the trees, but there was always a reasonable explanation waiting nearby. Then came the night with the Ouija board. The plan was to meet one of my roommate's friends at a small cemetery outside town. This guy called himself Dark Crow. I'll just call him Crow. We were warned beforehand not to ask for his real name and not to make jokes about whatever he planned to do. Apparently, he took the paranormal very seriously. And honestly, one look at him told you that. He had long black hair pulled into a low ponytail, a narrow braided beard, and a long coat that seemed a little dramatic for a warm summer night. He barely spoke when we arrived. He just watched us carefully, almost like he was deciding which one of us would cause trouble. There were 6 of us altogether, mostly in our early 20s. Normally, telling us not to joke around would have guaranteed the exact opposite. But something about Crow made everyone behave. He told us the cemetery was unusually active. Before doing anything else, he divided us into pairs and sent us walking between the graves for about 20 minutes. He said it would help us become more aware of the place. I've had a few experiences in my life that I still can't explain, so I wasn't completely skeptical. I've always felt that the more attention you give something, the more real it starts to feel. That night, most of us believed at least a little. A couple of people were clearly there to prove the rest of us wrong. When we finished walking around, we met at the steps of an old stone mausoleum. That was when Crow opened the trunk of his car and pulled out the Ouija board. He held it beneath the headlights for a few seconds because, apparently, it needed to charge. The thing glowed in the dark. I remember looking at this plastic, store-bought Ouija board and thinking, really? This is what's supposed to open a door to the other side? We sat in a circle on the mausoleum steps. The 6 of us gathered around the board while Crow sat behind it, leaning against the heavy metal doors. I was facing him, with my back toward the rest of the cemetery. We placed our fingers on the planchette and started with the usual questions. Is anyone here? Can you give us a sign? For a while, the planchette moved slightly, but everyone suspected someone else was pushing it. Nobody wanted to admit it, but we were all watching each other more closely than we were watching the board. Then we asked for a name. The planchette suddenly jerked beneath our fingers. It didn't slide gently. It pulled with purpose. It spelled out a strange name that none of us recognized. I can't remember the exact letters now, but it sounded old. Maybe Spanish. Maybe Latin? I really hope it wasn't Latin. We asked how it had died. The board spelled W-A-T-E-R. Someone asked whether there were other spirits in the cemetery. It answered, Y-E-S. Then my roommate, in a moment of pure genius, asked whether something bad was going to happen. The planchette moved again. Y-E-S. Almost immediately, the air turned freezing cold. At first, I thought I was just getting chills. Then I breathed out and saw a cloud of mist in front of my face. Everyone noticed it at the same time. This was late July. It had been warm and humid all evening, but suddenly it felt like winter had settled around the mausoleum. That was when Crow made this low sound, almost like he had just seen something he expected to see. I looked up. He wasn't staring at the board. He was staring directly behind me. Before I could turn around, the board began to rotate. Not the planchette, the entire board. We had already pulled our hands away when the temperature dropped, so none of us were touching it. The board slowly turned across the stone step, scraping softly underneath itself. Then it began moving faster. It completed one full rotation. Then another. Then a third. After the third turn, it stopped. Nobody said a word. I checked underneath it for string, wire, anything that could have pulled it. There was nothing. The board hadn't been altered, and nobody was close enough to move it without us seeing. Then I felt something press down on me. It started around my shoulders and spread across my chest and back. It felt like an enormous, weighted blanket had been dropped over my body, only it wasn't comforting. It felt like something was holding me in place. Crow looked straight at me. Very calmly, he said, "You need to leave." I didn't argue. I grabbed two of my friends, both of whom looked just as terrified as I felt, and we left immediately. I had no interest in staying to see what happened next. Later that night, my roommate came home and told me what happened after we left. They asked the board whether it favored anyone in the group. It spelled my initials. Then they asked whether I was connected to the bad thing it had predicted. The board answered, Y-E-S. After that, it repeatedly spelled the word M-O-V-E. So they moved from the mausoleum steps to the hood of the car. It spelled M-O-V-E again. They tried a bench near the cemetery entrance. Again, M-O-V-E. Finally, they carried the board to an old stone fountain near the center of the cemetery. That was where it stopped. The planchette moved to goodbye. My roommate later told me that Crow had expected something to react to me. He said he told me to leave because he was worried whatever had shown up might attach itself to me. People can believe whatever they want about Ouija boards, ghosts, or haunted cemeteries. I only know what I felt. I'll never forget the cold air, the board turning by itself, or that crushing weight settling over my shoulders. So take this as friendly advice. Leave the Ouija boards alone. And go birds! My partner and I have always been pretty skeptical people. I love stories about cryptids, UFOs, strange creatures, and all that wonderfully spooky stuff, but I've always treated them as folklore. They're fun to read about, and I'll happily put on a creepy video while I'm falling asleep, but I've never genuinely believed in ghosts, spirits, magic, or anything supernatural. Honestly, I'm still not sure I believe what happened to me. It started when one of my close friends was moving away. I decided to host an elaborate murder mystery night as a farewell party. I wrote the story myself, gave everyone a character, made costumes optional, and filled the house with puzzles and hidden clues. For one puzzle, I came up with what I thought was a brilliant little trick. I bought a cheap spirit board and several strong magnets. I hid the magnets beneath certain letters and placed another one inside the pointer, so it would seem to glide toward the message the players needed to uncover. It was nothing mystical, just a homemade party trick. And it worked perfectly. Everyone had a great time. A few friends stayed over, and by the following afternoon, the house was empty again. I cleaned everything up, put the board away with the other props, and didn't give it another thought. That night, sometime after I had fallen asleep, I suddenly opened my eyes. I was lying flat on my back, staring at the ceiling. At first, I just felt unusually tired. My body seemed heavy, almost as though I had been pressed deep into the mattress. Then I tried to move. I couldn't. My arms wouldn't lift. My legs wouldn't respond. I couldn't even turn my head. I had never experienced sleep paralysis before, but I knew what it was. So I immediately started talking myself through it. This is sleep paralysis. Your brain is awake, but your body hasn't caught up yet. You're safe. I knew people sometimes saw figures or heard things during these episodes. I understood how the brain could create what people often called a sleep paralysis demon. Knowing that didn't make me feel much better. I remember thinking, almost jokingly, please don't let me hallucinate something standing in the corner. That was when I heard the footsteps. They were right beside the bed. It sounded like something walking on 2 feet, slowly pacing across the floor. The steps would come closer to me, growing louder, and then turn away again. Closer. Farther. Closer. Farther. I kept trying to reason with myself. I knew it was probably an auditory hallucination. I knew part of my mind was still dreaming. There was a perfectly natural explanation for every second of it. But lying there, completely frozen, that explanation started to feel very thin. The footsteps approached one final time. Then they stopped beside my pillow. There was a sudden, sharp inhale, and then I felt it. It felt like someone leaned close and blew directly into my ear through pursed lips. The sound was so clear, and the sensation was so real, that my entire body snapped awake. I practically launched myself across the bed and landed on top of my partner. He woke up startled and asked what was wrong. I told him everything was fine. I said I'd explain in the morning, and we eventually went back to sleep. The strange part is that the following night, he had his first experience with sleep paralysis too. His experience wasn't exactly the same as mine, but he also felt that something was in the room with him. By the end of the week, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Neither of us had ever experienced sleep paralysis before. Then, within a day of each other, we both had an episode that came with the unmistakable feeling of another presence nearby. I know there are logical explanations. I know the board was only cardboard, plastic, and magnets. I know we had spent an entire evening telling ghost stories and pretending to contact the dead. Maybe those ideas simply followed us into our dreams. That is probably what happened. But every now and then, I remember those footsteps moving beside my bed. I remember that breath against my ear. And I wonder whether treating that board like an ordinary party prop invited something into the game that I never intended to play with. This is probably one of the strangest stories you'll ever hear, but every word of it still sticks with me. Years ago, a close friend of mine told me he was gay. He looked nervous and asked, "Are you still going to be my friend?" I told him, "Of course. That doesn't change anything. You're still you." Not long after that, I met his boyfriend, a man named Jonah. People called him the doll doctor because he could repair and restore almost any kind of doll. He was so talented that a famous country singer once arranged for him to fly out to Tennessee, restore part of her private collection, and return home a few days later. Dolls were Jonah's entire world. He collected them, bought them, sold them, and knew the history behind nearly every style. Then, one day, he was contacted by a family in Germany. They sent him an old Victorian doll that needed restoration. According to the family, the doll had once belonged to a young girl named Genevieve. Back then, families who couldn't afford fine doll hair sometimes used hair cut directly from the child who owned it. So Genevieve's real hair had been placed into the doll. The little girl carried that doll everywhere. Then an illness swept through the area, and Genevieve died. For reasons nobody could clearly explain, her grave was later disturbed. The doll was removed from the coffin, passed through several hands, and eventually sent to Jonah. Jonah had another roommate named Mason, who was Native American and very spiritually sensitive. From the moment the doll arrived, Mason wanted nothing to do with it. He said, "That thing is watching me." At night, he could hear it making noises. Not footsteps exactly, but the slow scraping sound of its arms or legs shifting. He described it as fingernails dragging across a chalkboard. Then the truly strange things began. Tiny footprints appeared in dust on top of televisions, stereos, and other electronic equipment. Messages began showing up on the bathroom mirror. "Mason is mine." At first, everyone assumed it was a prank. But then the same words appeared across the glass shower doors. Jonah also owned one of those battery-operated writing dolls that sits at a little desk and scribbles programmed sentences onto paper. One afternoon, they found sheet after sheet covered with the same message. "Mason is mine. Mason is mine. Mason is mine." The thermostat would turn itself up until the house became unbearably hot. Then one evening, they came home and found magazines ripped apart across the floor. When they opened Mason's bedroom door, every wall was covered in red writing. The ceiling was covered too. "Mason is mine," over and over again. At first, they suspected the writing doll, so they brought it to my house. But the disturbances continued back at their place. That was when I told them, "It isn't the writing doll. It's the Victorian doll from Germany." At around 4 in the morning, they brought the Victorian doll to my house. The moment it left their home, everything stopped. The messages stopped. The noises stopped. The thermostat stopped changing. The only unexplained thing that happened at my house was that both my car keys and my mother's car keys disappeared. We searched everywhere and never found them. I never felt that the doll was evil. I'm very sensitive to the energy around people and objects, and what I felt wasn't demonic. It felt more like an attachment, a lonely presence that had never separated from something it loved. I believe Genevieve was still connected to that doll. This all happened before the COVID lockdowns. While I was away on vacation, a relative became convinced the doll was dangerous. She contacted a well-known paranormal television investigator, and he expressed interest in buying it. But the offer was surprisingly low. I told him, "I don't want money for it. Donate $700 to a small pinball museum in Las Vegas, and I'll give you the doll." I returned from a 3-week trip to Florida in mid-March of 2020. By then, California was shutting down, businesses were closing, and everything had changed. I never heard from the investigator again. I've worked at a nightclub in Modesto for more than 30 years, and during October, I sometimes display the doll there. Some employees refuse to go near it. Others think it's fascinating. One night, a manager and I decided to ask the doll questions. Another employee had also brought in an old doll that had been passed down through her family and was rumored to be haunted. I didn't realize the manager was broadcasting the whole thing live online. We began asking Genevieve questions. For a while, nothing happened. Then we heard it. A little girl giggling. It wasn't loud, but it was perfectly clear. The sound seemed to come from right beside us, even though there were no children anywhere in the building. The laugh started sweetly, then twisted into something cold and unsettling. We nearly jumped out of our shoes. The strangest part was that the nightclub's owner happened to be watching the live broadcast. A few minutes later, he called his son and demanded, "What are they doing inside my club?" That wasn't the only strange thing I've experienced there. Over the years, I've heard unexplained footsteps, watched objects move at table height, and felt people standing behind me when nobody was there. One former bartender, a woman named Hallie, once took 4 selfies inside the 3rd stall of the women's restroom. The first 3 pictures looked normal. In the 4th, a man's face appeared behind her, emerging from the tiled wall. You could clearly see his eyes, nose, and mustache. We sent the photograph to a paranormal researcher, who told us it was some of the clearest evidence of a possible apparition he had ever examined. I still have that photograph. And I still have the doll. Okay, I have to admit, the idea of Manitoba being famous for ghosts still makes me laugh. Like, is that one of our signature things now? Prairie sunsets, honey dill sauce, and restless spirits? But honestly, after what happened to me during a ghost tour at the Royal Aviation Museum, maybe it should be. The strange part is that the museum itself is fairly new, so I went in assuming there wouldn't be much of a story there. I thought it would be a fun evening, maybe a little spooky, but nothing serious. By the end of the tour, though, I was ready to get out of that building as quickly as possible. The first weird thing happened less than 10 minutes after we started. Most of the main lights had been switched off, but the safety lights were still on. It wasn't pitch black. I could still see the stairs, the exhibits, and the general shape of everything around me. That's why I couldn't understand what I was seeing on the upper balcony. It looked like 2 or 3 small children were running around up there. They seemed to be playing, darting behind displays and peeking out again. At first, I assumed another group had entered the museum. But this was an adults-only tour. There weren't supposed to be any children in the building. In fact, our group was supposed to be completely alone apart from the guide and a security guard. The guard even went upstairs to check, but there was nobody there. I tried to convince myself that the lighting was playing tricks on me. It was dim, I was already expecting something spooky, and maybe my brain was just filling in the gaps. Then we moved into an exhibit containing pieces of an excavated aircraft wreck. The group decided to try the Estes method, where one person wears headphones and listens to a spirit box while answering questions they can't hear. I volunteered to wear the headphones. Honestly, the equipment wasn't great. I had to concentrate incredibly hard just to make out anything through the noise. But while I was sitting there, something else started happening. I became freezing cold. Not slightly chilly, it felt like my entire body had been lowered into ice water. The strange thing was that my head still felt completely normal. It was as though the cold stopped right at my neck. That made no sense, because I had been overheated earlier. I was wearing a heavy jacket, the building felt warm, and I'm usually the person complaining that a room is too hot. By the time the session ended, I was shaking. My friend reached over and touched my hand. Her hands are normally so cold that I joke she has no circulation, but this time she pulled away immediately. She said my skin felt unnaturally cold. And somehow, within a few minutes, it disappeared. Suddenly, I was warm again. Actually, I was sweating. It was as though the freezing sensation had never happened. At that point, I was unsettled, but the tour kept going. We moved into another section of the museum, and my friend took a turn with the headphones. I was exhausted by then, so I started making sarcastic comments toward whatever might have been listening. We rolled a few motion-activated balls across the floor and asked for something to move them. You know, the usual ghost hunting routine. I could still see those child-sized figures moving around the balcony, but I was too tired to keep reacting. I had reached that stage where you stop being frightened and start becoming irritated. Then I felt someone grab my ponytail. It wasn't a light touch. It felt like a hand wrapped around my hair and pulled downward hard enough to make me shout. I spun around immediately. Nobody was standing behind me. The nearest person was several feet away, far beyond arm's reach, and everyone looked just as confused as I was. That was the moment I was completely done. I didn't care what kind of spirits were supposedly in the museum. I didn't want another experiment, another dark room, or another question for the ghosts. I just wanted to leave before something decided to grab me again. The most frustrating part was that I seemed to be the only person experiencing anything. Because nobody else saw the figures, felt the sudden cold, or had their hair pulled. Some people assumed I was exaggerating or trying to entertain the group. I wasn't. So that was my night at the Royal Aviation Museum. It's a fascinating place, and I'm sure the daytime tours are wonderful. But as for wandering around there in the dark, and inviting invisible strangers to interact with me? I think I'll pass. I lived in that house from the time I was about 12 until I moved out at 16. And even now, thinking about it makes my skin crawl. There was this long hallway with a mirror at each end, facing directly toward each other. When you looked into one, the reflections repeated so far that you could practically see the back of your own body. More than once, while walking down that hallway, I felt absolutely certain that someone was following behind me. Not just a vague feeling either. It felt like a person was right there, matching my steps. Eventually, I got so frightened that I started staring at the floor whenever I walked through the hall. I couldn't look into either mirror. I was terrified that one day I'd see someone standing behind me, even though I knew I was alone. Then there were the footsteps in the ceiling. Almost every night, sometime between 1 and 1:30 in the morning, you could hear something walking above us. The steps were slow, heavy, and deliberate. They didn't sound like scratching or scurrying. They sounded like the footsteps of a full-grown person pacing through the ceiling. I had friends stay over who heard them too, so I know it wasn't just my imagination. One night, I was awake much later than usual, playing video games in my room. Everyone else was asleep, and the hallway light was on. From where I was sitting, I had a clear view down the hall and into part of the kitchen. At some point, I looked up and saw the shape of a person standing there. It was completely black. I couldn't see a face, clothing, or any details at all. It was just a human-shaped shadow, standing in the kitchen and staring directly at me. The moment I noticed it, the figure turned and calmly walked toward the refrigerator. Then it disappeared straight into it. Immediately afterward, our dogs, who slept in the kitchen at night, started going wild. They were barking, growling, and scrambling around as though someone had entered the room. I slammed my bedroom door, shoved blankets against the gap underneath it, and buried myself beneath the covers. I stayed there until morning, barely breathing. Another night, I had been reading in bed with the lamp on my nightstand. The room was dim, but there was still enough light to see everything clearly. Everything except one corner. The upper corner near the ceiling was pitch black. Not shadowy, not dim. It looked unnaturally dark, almost like a solid patch of darkness had been placed there. The light from the lamp reached the walls around it, but somehow, that corner swallowed everything. My mother also owned an old porcelain doll that she kept in the dining room. Its eyes seemed to follow you whenever you moved across the room. I've seen paintings and decorations designed to create that illusion, but this felt different. Sometimes I would turn the doll around so it faced the wall. Then I'd leave the room. When I came back, it would be facing outward again. My mother knew how uneasy it made me, but she never seemed frightened of it. The attic was worse than any other part of the house. A full staircase led to a finished room above the garage, and near the top was a small square hatch that opened into the attic. You had to walk directly beneath it whenever you used the stairs. That area felt oppressive, like the air became heavier the closer you got. I hated standing underneath that hatch. One afternoon, while I was alone near the stairs, I heard someone whisper my name from behind it. I didn't open it. I didn't even answer. That house also gave me terrible night terrors. I would dream about ancient ceremonies and the end of the world, with people performing rituals beneath enormous burning skies. Other dreams were harder to explain. I would see impossibly huge objects being pierced by tiny, needle-like slivers. There was no story or context, but the sight filled me with a kind of fear I can still feel in my body today. I also used to sleepwalk. My stepfather told me that I would sometimes walk into my parents' bedroom in the middle of the night and stand beside their bed, silently staring at them. I never remember doing it. There were many times when I heard someone call my name while I was home alone. The voice always sounded close enough that I thought someone must be standing in the next room. Strangely, my mother insists that the house made her feel protected. I never understood that. For me, that house was where most of the worst years of my childhood happened. There was a lot of pain in those walls, and some of it is still difficult for me to talk about. Maybe the things we experienced were connected to that pain. Maybe fear changed the way I saw the house. I honestly don't know. What I do know is that I have never felt more watched, more unwelcome, or more certain that my life was in danger than I did while living there. I was 24 when this happened, and even now, I still can't tell you exactly what saved me that night. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was some kind of sixth sense. Maybe it was a guardian angel. Or maybe the whole thing was just an unbelievable coincidence. Most of the strange experiences I've had were clearly paranormal, at least to me. But this one has always felt different, because there could be a natural explanation. I just don't know whether that explanation is enough. At the time, I was living in a small town in western Massachusetts. I worked near the center of town, only a few minutes away from my house on foot. I normally worked during the day, but that night I was covering an overnight shift for someone who had called out. It was very late, and the streets were completely empty. I had been walking for maybe a minute when I reached the point where I needed to cross the road. The sidewalk ended on my side, and my workplace was across the street anyway. The moment my foot touched the sidewalk on the other side, I stopped. There was a broken streetlight directly above me, so that entire section of the road was swallowed in darkness. But that wasn't what made me freeze. For a few seconds, it felt as though I wasn't standing on that street anymore. Instead of darkness, I suddenly saw what looked like a primitive settlement. There were people running between small shelters, desperately trying to escape something. I couldn't see what was attacking them, but I could hear their screams. They weren't ordinary screams. They were raw and terrified, the kind of sound that seems to reach straight into your body. It felt ancient, almost animalistic, as though I were witnessing people being hunted. The vision lasted no more than 5 seconds. Then it vanished. I was back beneath the broken streetlight, staring into the darkness. My heart was pounding. I began looking around frantically, trying to make out a shadow or the outline of someone hiding nearby. I thought maybe a person was waiting to grab me or attack me. Then I remembered that I wasn't supposed to be working that night. I was covering someone else's shift. Nobody outside of work knew I would be walking down that street at that hour. There was no reason for anyone to be waiting for me. Once I thought about that, I started feeling ridiculous. I actually laughed under my breath and told myself I was behaving like a child who was afraid of the dark. I convinced myself that I had imagined everything because I was tired and nervous about walking alone. So I started moving again. I took one step. At that exact moment, a pickup truck came around the corner. As it turned, its headlights swept across the sidewalk in front of me. And there, less than 12 feet away, was a mountain lion. It was crouched beside the sidewalk, facing me. It had been almost completely hidden in the darkness. The animal was low to the ground, perfectly still, watching me from the exact direction I had been about to walk. The engine and sudden burst of light startled it. The mountain lion sprang into the air, twisted around, and disappeared through a nearby backyard. The truck continued forward and pulled into a driveway a couple of houses away. The driver apparently hadn't noticed anything. He climbed out, casually humming to himself, without even glancing in my direction. Meanwhile, I was stumbling backward down the sidewalk, whispering, "No, no, no, absolutely not. What was that?" I somehow still made it to work. The first thing I did was tell my supervisor. I was shaking so badly that I could barely get the words out. He laughed. He told me there weren't any mountain lions in the area and insisted that I had probably seen a large bobcat. Then he repeated the story to some of my coworkers and joked that I had invented the whole thing. I was furious, but I also started questioning myself. Then, about 10 days later, the plant manager came into work talking excitedly about something he had seen while driving through town around midnight. A mountain lion had run directly across the road in front of his car. Suddenly, everyone believed mountain lions were in the area. Not long afterward, nearby towns began posting warnings online, telling residents to watch for a large mountain lion that had been seen wandering through the center of town at night. I'll admit, I'm still a little bitter about how quickly everyone believed the story once it came from someone they respected. But what stays with me most isn't the mountain lion or the way my coworkers reacted. It's those 5 seconds before the truck arrived. Something made me stop in the exact spot where I needed to stop. Something showed me people being hunted by an unseen predator. If I had continued walking normally, I would have passed within just a few feet of that animal before the truck ever turned the corner. Maybe my mind detected something that I wasn't consciously aware of. Maybe I heard its breathing or sensed its movement without realizing it. Perhaps the terrifying vision was simply my brain's way of warning me that a predator was nearby. Or maybe something else stepped in. Whatever happened, I listened. And I truly believe that pause saved my life. Hey there. I want to share with you some stories, real experiences, some strange, some downright eerie, that have been part of my life and the lives of people I know. It's like opening a window to the unknown, and I hope you'll find these stories as fascinating and chilling as I did. Let's start with a memory from when I was about 6 or 7. My mom moved us into this old house in Salem, New Jersey, that had been converted into apartments. It was just a few houses down from a mortuary, and behind it, there was this small, forgotten cemetery. Strange things started happening soon after we settled in. My mom's bedroom door would swing open and slam shut repeatedly. She blamed it on faulty hinges, but my gut told me something else was at play. Sometimes the door would just open and close a bit, but other nights it would go absolutely wild. I remember being too scared to sleep in my room because I'd see this dark silhouette standing in my doorway, just watching me. I was frozen with fear, unable to move. One day, my grandmother was babysitting me and warned me not to run inside the house. But I got this idea to fill my water gun and surprise her. The apartment was set up with a straight line from the kitchen at the back, through the dining room, and into the living room, right up to the front door, like a sprinter's dream. I filled my water gun and bolted at full speed. As I reached the living room, I was suddenly pushed down and held there. I screamed, but no sound came out. It was like I was glued to the floor, completely paralyzed but fully awake. Time seemed to stretch endlessly in that silent, terrifying moment until my grandmother came in. The noise of the world rushed back, overwhelming. When I asked her if she heard me scream, she looked at me like I was crazy and said no. Later that night, my mom came home and told me about the man who had killed his wife and then himself, right in my bedroom doorway. She said that's why the door kept opening and closing, and why the house felt haunted. Our neighbor had her own story. She locked her front door with all the locks one afternoon, went to shower, and when she came out, the door was wide open. No signs of forced entry. Nothing. I still try to dig into the history of that house and area, but it's like the past is hiding its secrets from me. Now, moving on to another story that's always stuck with me. When I was a kid, around 5 years old, I started seeing things others didn't. I remember visiting a neighbor with my mom and seeing an elderly man standing in her garden. He smiled, but didn't say a word. My mom didn't acknowledge him at all. Inside the house, I saw him again in the hallway, watching us silently. I asked my mom and the neighbor about the man, and they told me he was her husband, who had died 2 weeks earlier. It was surreal. Later, at my uncle's house, I saw a young man pacing the hallway upstairs, but no one else saw him. Turns out, years before, a man had committed suicide in that house, and my cousin and even my little cousin had seen him too. It was both frightening and fascinating. Another time, when my brother and I played near a creek, I noticed an old man watching us from a distant porch. He seemed kind, dressed neatly, but my brother never saw him. Years later, I found out the house had been empty for years, and that the man's name was Frank, who had lived and died decades ago. One more chilling experience happened when I was 19, working night shifts caring for disabled people. I saw what I thought was a coworker walk into a client's room, but when I followed, no one was there. Outside the window, my coworker was fixing a car. Later, I learned the house had been the scene of a double homicide years before. Now, my dad once told me about a hunting trip he took with his uncle and a friend in the late 70s in the southeastern US. They were after raccoons with their trained dogs. They ventured farther than usual into remote wilderness near a national park. The dogs cornered what should have been a raccoon up a huge solitary tree on a cliff above a creek, but strangely, the dogs went silent and walked away. Under the tree was a stone that looked like a gravestone. As my dad shone a light up into the branches, all their lights suddenly went out, plunging them into darkness. They were spooked but managed to head back, their lights flickering back on after some distance. Dad never went back there again. That area was known for drownings and strange sightings, a haunted spot perhaps. Switching gears, I want to tell you about a creepy experience I had with a radio. I used to drive to work with a Bluetooth transmitter connected to my car radio to play my playlists. One morning, the signal started glitching badly. Then, through the static, I heard muffled voices, like intercepted secret communications. Then, clear as day, the word "killing" echoed through the speakers before the signal returned to normal. I was chilled to my core. I told my mom, but she brushed it off, which surprised me because she's usually sensitive to such things. I never heard anything like it again. Here's a story from someone more skeptical, someone who doesn't believe much in the supernatural. One night, as a child, they woke up to see a strange shadow standing, moving erratically in a short hallway between their room and their parents'. The shadow looked like a little kid but was darker than anything they'd ever seen. Though it didn't feel malicious, the sight terrified them. They screamed for their parents. The shadow fled into their dad's closet. Their parents found nothing and thought it was a bad dream. But it wasn't. Then there's this unsettling tale of a college senior who felt hypnotized by a mysterious girl named Clara. They'd find themselves sharing deeply personal secrets without meaning to, freezing mid-step during crucial moments, and even handing over money without question. It felt like mind control, but no one could explain it. Eventually, they avoided her altogether. Another chilling account comes from someone who rented a room from a person radiating dark energy. After the person moved in, all the trees in the yard started dying one by one, despite care and watering. At night, the tenant felt something wrestling them for their blankets, a presence they called the Bone Man. It would pull on their clothes, and once, they realized the fingers pulling their shirt were actually bony, not wooden buttons as they'd first thought. The Bone Man tried to suffocate them multiple times. The terror was intense and real. On a lighter, yet still spooky note, a roommate set up a motion-detecting camera in a toddler's bedroom. The camera caught images of an unseen presence, floating pillows, objects moving midair, and doors being held shut until politely asked to open. One night, The door to a bedroom shut slowly and completely on its own, something that never happened before. The ghost seemed to have a personality, mischievous and stubborn. From the perspective of someone working late-night emergency calls, there are stories of people experiencing sundowner syndrome, where confusion and anxiety spike at sunset. Some callers describe seeing children who can't find their mother, or men cleaning deer with a hose, visions that vanish upon investigation. There are also eerie ghost calls, static-filled lines from disconnected numbers, sometimes with faint breathing. Another story is from a security officer working graveyard shifts in a building built in 1912. They felt watched, witnessed a garbage lid shaking on its own, doors moving without wind, and papers flipping on clipboards caught on CCTV. An alarm clock would go off every night at exactly 11:04 p.m. in a room where no one worked at night. There was even a mysterious sweet smell appearing and disappearing. These oddities made them consider transferring out. Then there's a touching yet haunting story of a child whose father passed away when they were 8. The child had a terrifying encounter with their father's spirit, who gave them a mean look and kissed their mother's forehead. The mother had dreams of him, but the child never received a proper goodbye, leaving them with lingering sadness and unanswered questions. A skeptical homeowner shared their experiences of unexplained movements, missing items that reappear, and seeing shapes out of the corner of their eye. Their dog would howl for no reason or stand watchfully at empty doors. Once, they saw their wife enter their son's room and turn on a light, but when asked, she was in the bedroom at the other end of the house. They know these events don't make sense, but can't fully explain them. One chilling night jog in a local park beside an old graveyard led 2 friends to witness a floating, orb-like shape, moving and morphing into different forms. It moved towards them, and they fled in terror. Looking back, they wished they'd stayed to see what would happen, but their instincts saved them. Another person has been feeling watched while sleeping for 3 years. The entity appeared in various forms: a pale, skeletal figure with bright white eyes, a man in a black cloak, then a half-goat, half-man creature muttering under its breath. They heard a little girl's voice calling their name, whispering and scratching at their door, though they don't have pets. Salt helped for a while, but the presence returned stronger. One more story stands out: a person who experiences vivid sleep paralysis episodes with terrifying hallucinations. One night, the whole house shook violently, windows rattled, and a greenish glow filled the room. They saw a faceless, limb-tangled monster that wanted to harm them. Frozen with fear, they eventually escaped to their dad's room, sobbing uncontrollably. Years later, during a remodel, the family found a mummified kitten and a black and white photo of a girl inside a wall. Guests who stayed in that part of the house often felt uneasy or had disturbing dreams. On a more comforting note, a former student dreamed of their favorite high school teacher who had recently passed away. In the dream, the teacher was older, heavier, with white hair, standing in a classroom full of students. The teacher gave the student a warm, reassuring smile, acknowledging their grief without words. The dream brought peace and closure, a glimpse of another reality where the teacher lived a full life. There's also a tale of a possible UFO sighting on a cold beach night. 3 friends saw yellowish lights moving oddly across the sky, making sharp turns unlike meteors. Later, their car batteries died, and their service disappeared temporarily. A stranger walked alone in the cold on a deserted road. The experience left them confused and unsettled. Finally, someone shared their gift of predicting death through dreams or sudden insights. They've seen loved ones in farewell dreams, had near-death experiences, and felt a thin veil between life and the beyond. Despite the sadness, there's peace in knowing they won't be alone when their time comes. Thanks for listening to these tales from the edge of the ordinary. Whether you believe in ghosts, spirits, or unexplained phenomena, these stories remind us of the mysteries that surround us, waiting just beyond our understanding. Hey, I want to share something with you. Something that's been with me for almost a decade, and honestly, it's kind of wild. It all started way back in 2011 when I was just 12 years old. My family and I had just moved into this new house, and from the very first day, I felt this strange vibe about the place. Not exactly bad, not exactly good, but like there were invisible eyes watching me. And you know how that can creep you out when you're a kid. So, the house had a few areas I'll never forget, spots we started calling hot spots because of the weird energy they gave off. One of these was what we called the rose bathroom. Now, picture this. Everything pink. Pink tiles, a pink sink, pink floors, like a bubblegum dream gone slightly off. It was a pretty small bathroom, and honestly, I always felt kind of suffocated in there, like the air was thick and hard to breathe. I just hated it. At first, I thought maybe I was just a little claustrophobic, you know? Everyone has spaces they don't like. Then there was this weird hallway area. Think of a T shape in a road. That's exactly what it looked like. This hallway connected my bedroom and the living room, with this corner right in the middle that always felt off. No matter if it was daytime or nighttime, if I was standing in my room or in the living room, I felt like eyes were glued on me from that corner. It's hard to explain, but it gave me the chills every single time. And of course, I can't forget the basement. Half of it was finished, a cozy little bar area, complete with stools and all the trappings. The other half was unfinished, just a laundry, storage, and workshop space. When we first got there, my dad, my sister, and I went down to explore the workshop part. We found some old yearbooks from the school I went to and some other old stuff. We took a break, went upstairs for lunch, then when we came back, the door to the workshop wouldn't open. The handle had somehow fallen off, and the door was stuck tight. None of us had locked it. It was locked from the inside, and that didn't make any sense. How could that happen when no one was inside? And my mom made my sister and me wash our dog in the basement too, using the big tub in the laundry area. We absolutely hated it down there. Every time I was in that dim basement, scrubbing the dog, I felt like someone was watching me. I even pictured him in my head. A really tall man, dressed in a button-up shirt and slacks, standing just inside the bar area by that corner entrance. My hair would stand up every time, and the minute I was done, I'd bolt up the stairs like I was running for my life. The rest of the house? It always felt just a little off. But those were definitely the places where the energy was thickest. All right, fast forward a bit. We moved out around 2014. But those dreams I had about the house? They didn't stop. I had them while we lived there, sure, but even after we moved out, they stuck around. I kept dreaming about the house for years, up until 2020 when I was 21. By then, the dreams had turned into full-blown night terrors. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, screaming, heart pounding. These nightmares came every few months, but in the first few months of 2020, they hit me 3 times in a row. The last one was the worst. My sister appeared in the dream, telling me someone had died in the rose bathroom. That's when I started to think, what if there was more to this? I began digging into the history of the house and found out about the first family who built it back in the 1950s. Turns out, the father died in the house in the 1980s from a massive heart attack. The house sat right across from a hospital. The driveway lined up right with the hospital entrance. It made sense. He probably had a traumatic death there. I found the mother's obituary too, and since she had passed only recently, I could find info about their children. One daughter caught my attention in particular. I even found her on Facebook and reached out carefully, not wanting to upset her. I mentioned the hot spots in the house. but I stayed quiet about the things I'd felt or seen. I wanted to hear her side. When she replied, I nearly stopped breathing. She said, "He died in the Rose bathroom." That last dream where my sister told me that? Was it a coincidence? She also said her dad loved his workshop and never let anyone inside. He spent a lot of time downstairs by that corner near the bar, because that's where he kept his favorite drinks. My old bedroom? It used to belong to his wife who, she said, didn't love him the way he loved her anymore. That explained the eyes I felt from the doorway, but never felt the presence step fully inside my room. She told me she was the closest to her father and that she shared the room my sister had stayed in. I asked my sister about this, and she said she definitely felt uncomfortable in the house, but didn't have any details. Then I told the daughter about the tall, well-dressed man I'd imagined, the one standing by the bar corner. She said her dad was 6'3", a businessman who always wore a button-down shirt and slacks. She even sent me a photo. It was the exact same man I'd pictured in my mind all those years. Since that conversation, I haven't had a single dream about that house. Not one. It's been almost 3 years free of those terrifying nightmares. It makes me wonder, did he use me to send a message to his daughter? To let her know he was still around in some way? That there's something beyond the living world? Maybe the only way he could get my attention was through these dreams. It feels a little self-centered to think he chose me for this, but honestly, I can't come up with any other explanation. All my life, I've had strange, borderline psychic experiences. But this one? This is by far the most intense and meaningful. Sometimes, the past whispers through the walls, and maybe, just maybe, we're meant to listen. Hey, I want to share with you 4 really strange experiences involving ghosts or spirits that people have had. These stories are all unique, and honestly, some of them still give me chills. So let's take a slow walk through each one, and I'll try to capture the feelings, the sounds, and the atmosphere that made them so eerie. First, there's the story from a young person named Jame. This happened about 5 years ago when Jame was a high school freshman, feeling pretty sick and stuck at home. It was early morning, around 5 a.m., when Jame woke up suddenly because their phone started playing music. Not just any song, but Love by Keisha Cole. Now, Jame didn't remember putting the music on, and their playlist did have that song, but they usually didn't listen to music to fall asleep. The last app Jame remembered using before bed was Snapchat, so this was strange. Jame paused the music, looked at the clock, and then turned toward the door. Right next to the bed stood a figure, barely visible in the dark. It was like someone in a long, dark robe, and the face was completely covered by a white mask. No mouth, just tiny black eyes. The closest thing Jame could think of was No Face from Spirited Away, that haunting, expressionless mask. But here's what's really odd. Jame didn't feel scared. Maybe it was because they were sick, or maybe the figure just didn't seem threatening. So Jame just stared back at it for a good 5 minutes, frozen, before finally drifting back to sleep. The next morning, Jame thought it was all a dream until they checked the phone. The music app was still open, paused exactly where Jame had stopped the song the night before. It was the real deal. Jame told their dad, who chalked it up to a fever dream, but Jame couldn't figure out how the music got there or why it played at all. Nothing else happened since, but that moment still creeps Jame out. It's one of those things that just doesn't add up. The second story comes from a family trip to the Glen Tavern Inn in Santa Paula around 2015. The storyteller, a young person named Lila, went there with their mom, stepdad, and brother, just for a fun getaway. They chose the Glen Tavern specifically because it's said to be haunted, and walking inside, Lila's mom said it felt like stepping into another dimension. It was that kind of heavy, different air, almost like the walls themselves were holding secrets. Curious, Lila's stepdad asked the man at the front desk if he'd ever experienced anything paranormal while working there. The man nodded and began describing sightings. An older woman, several children roaming the hallways, laughter echoing when no one was around, footsteps pounding on the floors, and music playing softly though no instruments were visible. The restaurant, he said, was especially lively in this supernatural sense. Lila can't remember their exact room or floor, but everything seemed normal at first. Then, around 5 a.m., Lila's mom woke up to find the bathroom faucet running and the bedroom door wide open. No one else was awake, and no one had touched it. When Lila searched online later, they found others had similar experiences with faucets turning on by themselves at the Glen Tavern. It was subtle, but undeniably strange. Moving on to the third story, this one is a bit more technical, but no less eerie. A middle-aged couple reached out to someone investigating paranormal activity because their son's recently inherited car seemed to be acting on its own. The story behind the car was heartbreaking. The vehicle belonged to the son's best friend, who had died in a tragic accident. They had swapped cars for the night, and the friend was killed in a crash involving a drunk driver. The friend's parents gave the son the friend's truck afterward. The investigator teamed up with a Toyota mechanic to thoroughly check the truck's systems: brakes, engine, sensors, computer, everything. They even drove it for 2 days with all sorts of monitoring devices running: a DVR, an EMF meter, camcorder, and dash cam. Nothing unusual was caught, and the investigator initially concluded the truck wasn't haunted. But 6 weeks later, the couple called again. The father was driving the truck when, suddenly it locked its brakes, made a sharp right turn, and skidded into a ditch, all on its own. Almost at the same moment, a drunk driver in a Mustang ran a stop sign, lost control, and crashed into a tree nearby. A sheriff was nearby, running radar, and witnessed the entire sequence. Both drivers were lucky to escape with minor injuries. The sheriff's official report described the Mustang's reckless behavior and the crash, but didn't include what he told the investigator off the record. He said he saw the pickup truck lock its brakes and veer sharply into the ditch without the driver making any move. The driver himself told the sheriff that he didn't control the truck. It just did it by itself. The sheriff was baffled, as the truck's sudden move likely prevented a collision with the Mustang, which the truck driver couldn't have seen because of trees blocking his view. Finally, there's a very brief mention of goats in the kitchen, but unfortunately, that story wasn't detailed. Still, it adds a little odd touch to this collection. Each of these stories is different, but they all share this feeling of the unexplained pressing just beneath the surface of everyday life. Whether it's a silent figure in the dark, faucets turning on by themselves, or a vehicle seemingly driven by an unseen force, they remind us how much mystery still lingers around us. I'm curious what you think, whether you believe in ghosts or have some other explanation. These are moments that stick with people because they challenge what we understand about reality. Thanks for listening to these tales. If you have any ideas or stories of your own, I'd love to hear them. You know, I got a call recently from a woman, let's call her Mrs. Landon, who was absolutely convinced her cat was possessed. Now, I wasn't about to jump to any spooky conclusions right away. Honestly, I was pretty skeptical. But I'll admit, her story was curious enough to warrant a closer look. She told me that her cat would suddenly start screaming, really loud, like it was terrified or angry. And it didn't stop there. The cat walked in this strange, slow-motion way, tilting its head at odd angles that just didn't look natural. And if she tried to get near it during these episodes, the cat would lash out with its claws. which is pretty unusual for a normally sweet pet. Then, after one of these episodes, the cat wouldn't just calm down. No, it would hide but stay tense, its tail flicking wildly and growling softly to itself for up to an hour. It was bizarre. I shared this with one of my teammates, someone who's got a real sensitivity to the paranormal. Once she heard the story, she was insistent. She said we had to check it out. So we made our way to Mrs. Landon's house around 4:30 in the afternoon. She gave us a warm tour of her home, a cozy little ranch-style place with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. Nothing about it screamed haunted or creepy. Then she brought out the star of the show, the cat. The little guy was affectionate and immediately took to my teammate, rubbing up against her like they'd known each other forever. My partner spent a couple of hours alone with the cat while I handled the usual paperwork and formalities with Mrs. Landon. She told us she had a date that evening and would be working a late-night shift at the hospital, so she invited us to stay and investigate while she was out. She left around 7:30 p.m., and that's when we officially started our investigation. We moved from room to room, quietly asking questions, hoping to catch some sort of response, maybe an EVP or a knock. The house was still. The only sounds the soft hum of our equipment and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Nothing happened for hours. Then, right at 11:30 p.m., the cat's scream shattered the silence from the master bedroom. I was about to step inside when my partner grabbed my shoulder and put a finger to her lips, signaling me to be silent. The cat's screams were chilling, sharp and desperate, like it was warning us or pleading for help. My skin prickled, hairs standing on end as I strained to listen. In the corner of the room, a shadow began to form, a dense, shapeless darkness that seemed almost alive. There was a whisper, so faint and hollow that none of our recorders picked it up, and it was unintelligible to our ears. The cat was furious, scared, and ready to defend itself. We were witnessing everything Mrs. Landon had described, right there in front of us. Calmly, my partner addressed the shadow, her voice steady and gentle. "You're scaring the cat. I don't think that's what you want. If you leave this room and go into the bedroom across the hall, we can help you." We moved silently to the smaller bedroom and sat on the bed, waiting. The silence was thick, broken only by our quiet breaths. After a few minutes, my partner grabbed my arm and pointed toward the doorway leading to the bathroom shared by the 2 smaller bedrooms. There, I saw it clearly, a humanoid shape, pitch black and lacking any features, darker than the shadows around it. We had worked together on cases like this before, so we followed our usual routine. I spoke softly to the entity. "It's okay. The cat's calm now. We want to help you." The shadow shifted slowly through the doorway, just a little into the room. Then, through my DVR and earpiece, I distinctly heard a whispered word. "Kitty." I asked if it wanted to pet the cat, and the shadow stretched out a vague arm, pointing toward the master bedroom. I asked if it wanted to hurt the cat, waiting for a clear answer. There was a soft sigh, almost like a whimper. I repeated the question, explaining that for us to help, it needed to answer honestly. My partner later told me she sensed it was a young male spirit, possibly an adolescent with some developmental challenges during life. As we talked, the shadow gently swayed back and forth, listening intently. I told it, "You scared the cat. If you want to pet it, you have to make friends. Sit still, talk to the cat, and it will learn you mean no harm. Then, the cat will come to you." A moment later, the cat appeared in the hallway doorway, calm and still. None of us moved or spoke, not even the spirit. After a few quiet seconds, the cat walked over and sat on the bed beside us. I spoke softly to the cat while my partner scratched behind its ears. When I looked up again, the shadow was gone. Nothing else happened that night. We locked up the house and left quietly. 2 days later, my teammate called me, her voice bubbling with excitement. She had done some research and found out that a young man with Down syndrome had died on the property years ago after falling from a treehouse. We gathered all our evidence and met Mrs. Landon again the next day. I played her the recordings of our conversations with the spirit so she could understand exactly what had occurred. When she heard me explaining how to make friends with the cat, she began to cry softly. She told us that just that morning, the cat had been lying on the bed in the smaller bedroom, purring loudly and moving its head as if someone was gently scratching it. It was like the spirit had finally found peace through the cat's companionship. And that, my friend, is how a scared little cat and a lost young spirit found their way to each other and to peace, right there in that quiet, unassuming home. Hey there. I want to share a few stories that have been swirling in my mind. Stories from nights filled with shadows and unexpected moments that made our hearts race or wonder. So, sit back and let me take you through these little journeys, okay? First, there was that summer when my cousins came over to spend the break with my family. You know how a house feels with 4 kids and 2 adults all bustling around? It was lively, noisy, and full of that restless energy only kids can have. One evening, around 8, my cousin, let's call her Cassie, just a bit different from the name you might expect, and I found ourselves in my room playing with a plastic Ouija board. It was one of those cheap, colorful ones. Nothing serious, just kids being curious. The room was dim, shadows stretching across the walls, and I tossed playful little insults into the dark, teasing the silence. Cassie laughed, the sound light and carefree, and eventually we left the board alone, thinking nothing more would come of it. I actually thought I didn't have to say goodbye to whatever might have been lurking there because, well, nothing had happened. But maybe I was wrong. Later that night, around 10, the youngest cousins, little ones full of energy and innocence, asked us to play hide and seek. I thought, why not? It was all fun and games. We played a few rounds, laughter echoing through the house, shadows dancing as we darted around, and still, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then came midnight. Oh, I remember that moment like it was etched into my mind. I was hiding in my closet, the air thick and a little musty in the cramped space. My youngest cousin was squeezed beside me, wide-eyed and unsure where else to hide. Cassie, the oldest cousin, had tucked herself under the covers on my bed, pillows heaped on top to keep her hidden. She was getting a bit tired of not being found first, so she chose that spot to jump out and scare my sister, who was seeking. Now, here's where the house itself felt different. We were upstairs, quiet except for the soft creaks that carpeted stairs sometimes make. Downstairs, the adults were keeping to themselves. The garage door opened, and we knew that was where my sister was counting. "Ready or not, here I come," she called out, her voice carrying lightly up the stairs. It was a bit of a walk from the garage to the stairway, so we waited in tense silence. Suddenly, no creak on the stairs, but footsteps, soft, pacing back and forth, right outside my bedroom door. My cousin, thinking it was my sister, leapt out with a fake scream. Then came a scream that wasn't hers, a blood-curdling, chilling scream that froze the air around us. I burst out of the closet, heart pounding wildly, and caught a glimpse of a dark, distorted figure gliding past the doorway to the left. Being the oldest, I didn't hesitate. I ran out the door, my breath ragged and loud in the stillness. To the left was the bathroom. I searched every corner, every shadow, but the figure was gone. Later, Cassie whispered that maybe we had forgotten to say goodbye to whatever we had stirred up that night. I just nodded, the words heavy on my tongue. I know. Now, let me tell you about a night in the woods, a place called Pleasant Grove, not far from where I live in southwestern Ontario. My friends and I, all in our 20s, love those late-night trail walks, the kind where the woods are alive with silence and the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot. This area is steeped in history. Underground railroads, indigenous stories, even echoes from the War of 1812, given how close it is to the lake. We stepped into the woods at around 2 a.m., the air cool and heavy. Right away, an unsettling feeling washed over me. It was like the trees themselves were watching, their branches whispering secrets just out of reach. The deeper we walked, the heavier that feeling became, until we reached two bent trees crossing over the path like a giant X. One of my buddies pointed out that it was bad luck to walk under them, a kind of bad juju we should respect. We all agreed, feeling eyes on us, the kind that make your skin crawl. We turned to head back, and suddenly, the forest seemed to hold its breath, every sound muffled, every creature silent. Then, from behind us, came a loud, clear whistle. It wasn't musical or friendly. It was sharp, like someone calling a dog. But there was no one out there. No houses nearby, no late-night wanderers. We all took off running, heartbeats pounding like drums in our chests. For guys like us, big and comfortable in the woods, that's saying something. As we left, a faint smell of rotten eggs hung in the air, something that hadn't been there when we came in. It was unsettling, like the woods themselves were warning us away. Then there's the story of me and two close friends trying out a game called hide and seek alone. We'd played before, nothing strange ever happened, so we thought it was just a silly game. We prepared the doll, placed a strand of hair inside, and started. We hid behind a thick curtain on a windowsill, legs stretched out over a radiator, the room dim and quiet. I was skeptical, strong-minded, not believing in anything paranormal. But almost immediately, I heard soft little footsteps, like tiny feet filled with rice, moving from the bathroom to my room. My friends looked at me, eyes wide, sharing that they were hearing strange noises too, the kind of bumps and thumps that furniture makes when no one's near. We didn't want to mess around, so we rushed to the bathroom to sprinkle salt water on the doll. Even as I passed my room, the soft pattering followed. The doll hadn't moved, nothing had. We ended the ritual, decided to throw the plushie away, and I burned the hairs we had left inside, hoping to end whatever had started. But then, the weird stuff began. That very morning, at 6, I was smoking a cigarette with one of my friends when a cigarette butt suddenly jumped from the ashtray and rolled across the table. We saw it, both of us frozen in disbelief. Days later, I was home alone with my boyfriend when I found an old, dusty lamp in my mom's room turned on, though no one had touched it. Then came the stranger who showed up at my door, late at night, ringing the intercom. He claimed to be looking for me, and he had a knife. I was terrified and filed a police report, but when security cameras were checked, no one had rung the intercom that night. It was as if the calls were happening without a caller. A month later, my two friends stayed over again. That night was the strangest. They usually sleep on the couch, and I went to bed around 3 a.m. One friend, let's call her Anna, felt uneasy all night, constantly waking and glancing down the hallway as if expecting something. Around 3:30, the other friend, Beth, felt fingers tapping her shoulder. 3 taps, twice. She woke to a crowded feeling on the couch, turned and saw me, or at least my hair, peeking from under blankets between her and Anna. She went back to sleep. Later, a strange light flickered on from an unused electrical box behind the TV, waking Beth in the pitch-black room. She threw a shirt over the light, sipped water, and when she turned on her flashlight, she saw my hair again, this time hugging Anna from behind. Beth whispered, "Good night, OP. Good night, Anna." Anna responded, "I don't." In the morning, I was nowhere to be found on the couch. They asked if I had slept with them, but I'd been in my room all night. I have never sleepwalked in my life, and I'm a heavy sleeper. Once I'm out, I don't move until fully rested. I sighed and took some sage, closed all windows and doors, and lit it on the couch. The air turned cold, especially on my right side. like icy fingers brushing my skin. Then, just yesterday, the large water bowl we keep for my pets in the bathroom was found empty, though the bathroom floor was dry with no sign of spillage. We couldn't explain where the water had gone. Today, I woke up late, walked my dog, showered, ate, and went back to sleep while Anna napped on the couch. I've had sleep paralysis before, so I wasn't scared, just uncomfortable. But this time was different. I dreamed I saw my room, got up, and walked to the living room, where Anna had been sleeping. Instead of her, there was a disfigured figure wearing the robe she had at my place, staring deep into my soul. I locked myself in my room, laid in bed, and began experiencing sleep paralysis. I was terrified, though I don't know why. Anna woke and opened my door, but I couldn't signal her. She let me be, not knowing I was in terrible pain. I struggled for what felt like 40 minutes, trying to rise from the bed, but an invisible force kept pushing me down, suffocating me. I felt a presence beside me, on the right, barely able to move or hold my phone. Then, just as Anna came to wake me, the force vanished, and I sat up, crying out her name. The timing was exact. Anna texted me when she woke, and I checked the clock the moment she opened the door. I thought I might die that night. I have never been so scared. Am I crazy? What is happening? It sounds unbelievable, but it's real, and it's terrifying. I wrote this because I can't sleep. What do you think I should do? Finally, there's a sweeter story, one that's filled with warmth and a touch of mystery. It's about my childhood dog, and how his spirit might still be with us. When he passed away, we took him to a pet cremation specialist who made lovely memorial keepsakes, like paw prints. My mom asked him what drew him to this line of work, and he shared a story about his first dog. After she died, he placed a garden light near the spot where she used to rest. That light kept turning on and off by itself, even after it broke, like she was still there, watching over him. I thought it was just a comforting tale, maybe a little kooky, but something to help with grief. But then this Christmas, while at my mom's house, a decorative Christmas tree light on the mantle where our dog's urn sits started turning on and off all by itself. At first I thought Mom was flicking it on and off, but then she asked who was doing it, and none of us admitted to it. We're not pranksters. We'd never keep up a joke that long without laughing. One morning the light was off, so Mom checked the battery and flipped the switch. It stayed off for a moment, then flicked back on, all by itself. It seemed to come alive whenever people were nearby and go dark when we left. It felt like our dog was visiting, just like old times. Our other dogs even started hanging out near the tree more than usual. Funny thing, our current dog's name is Ghost. It feels like a sign, doesn't it? Maybe it's just faulty wiring, or maybe it's something more. I don't know what to believe, but my heart wants to think it's him, coming back to say hello. And that's a comforting thought in the quiet moments. So these are my stories, moments where the veil seemed thin, where the ordinary brushed up against the extraordinary. Thanks for listening. It helps just to share these whispers from the night. Hey there. I want to share something that's been on my mind for a long time. Something that has fascinated me deeply, and maybe even unsettled me a little. It's about shadow people. You know, those dark, fleeting figures some folks say they've seen out of the corner of their eye, or when they're alone in the night. I've noticed so many people, on Reddit, across the internet, and even in conversations in real life, talk about them, asking what they really are, what they want, and why they show up. So I thought, why not share what I've discovered? Because after tons of research, the explanation I've landed on feels like the closest thing to the truth that I can confidently give you. Now, I want to be clear right up front. The word truth in my title is in quotes for a reason. I don't claim to hold all the answers, but this is the most reasonable, well-researched theory I've pieced together, driven by nothing but honest curiosity and passion. There's just something about these shadowy figures that pulls me in, like a puzzle I have to solve. A lot of people throw out all kinds of ideas about shadow people. They might be interdimensional beings, aliens, ghosts, angels, demons. The list is endless. But I'm not here to spin a religious tale, and I'm definitely not superstitious. What I do believe, and what many have suggested over time, is that shadow people could actually be jinns, sometimes called jinns, entities mentioned in the Quran and Islamic tradition. The interesting thing about jinns is that they're said to be made from smokeless fire, able to take any shape they want. So, these shadow people? They might not be shadows at all. Instead, they could be beings made of the same flickering heat you see above a flame. Imagine that for a moment. Something not quite tangible, not really shadows, but more like living flames that choose to appear dark and shadowy when they want to stay hidden. They live here among us, but we only see them if they want us to, or if they're called. And if you happen to see one without inviting it, that's probably because it's attracted to the energy you're giving off. Usually negative vibes like fear, anxiety, anger, or feelings of inadequacy. These emotions seem to open channels in your mind, almost like letting them through a door. When they appear, most of the time they just keep to themselves, standing silently, watching, unless you call them or provoke them. Their lifespan? Who knows? It could be hundreds or even thousands of years. But here's something wild. They might only have the mental age of a teenager, around 10 to 15 years old. That might explain some of their strange, sometimes inexplicable behaviors that leave us scratching our heads. Interestingly, these shadow beings are more afraid of us than we are of them. Yet they're also incredibly curious. Some have even said shadow people can fall in love with humans, which might explain some encounters. And they definitely like it when we talk about them, theorize about them, and try to uncover their secrets. Maybe that's why I'm telling you all this, though it does make me wonder if just by talking about them, I'm drawing their attention right now. There's also talk that humans have used shadow people in black magic since ancient times, like Babylonian times, but that's a whole other story. Some shadow people might even be spirits or demons, depending on who you ask. But I've seen plenty of accounts where people insist these beings are harmless, even benevolent. I think that's a bit naive. They do have a dark agenda toward mankind, not necessarily physical attacks, but their battle is one for our souls. So, what should you do if you think you're encountering these shadow figures? First, if they're just standing there, watching you, not doing anything else, you probably don't need to panic. It usually means you're radiating those negative emotions I mentioned. The best thing is often to ignore them. They tend to vanish if you don't give them attention. If ignoring doesn't work, many people say that simply telling them to leave, either silently in your head or out loud, can work wonders. Some even swear at them to get them to go. And here's a quirky one: spitting at them. It sounds strange, but apparently shadow people are repelled by human body fluids like saliva, blood, urine, or even tears. They're also incredibly sensitive to sound. It's said that shadow people can hear even the quietest whispers of your conscious and subconscious thoughts, like they're tuned into every memory and feeling inside your mind. You can think of it like a really intense form of misophonia, a condition where certain sounds trigger negative reactions. Because of this sensitivity, some people have successfully banished them by yelling or even singing loudly when they see them. Not only does this startle them, but the positive energy from singing seems to drive them away. If shouting or singing doesn't do the trick, some have tried playing high-pitched sounds through speakers. Most shadow beings can't handle those frequencies and take off. But beware, some of these entities are stronger than others, so you might need to get more aggressive, depending on the situation. There's also prayer, which I understand to be one of the most powerful methods to banish them. While I've never tried it myself, I've heard that reciting specific religious verses in their original languages can cause them to burn, as if sending them straight to hell. This is supposed to be the ultimate way to expel them from your presence or your home. Now, I have to tell you about one shadow figure that's especially notorious: the Hat Man. You might have heard of him. He's described as wearing a trench coat, a top hat, sometimes carrying a briefcase, and sometimes his eyes glow red, though red eyes aren't exclusive to him. The Hat Man is never friendly. If you've ever seen him, I'm truly sorry, because he usually appears during some of the darkest, saddest moments of your life. He feeds off that negative energy, growing stronger the more you suffer. Some say he even foreshadows terrible events, like the death of someone close or an accident. He's definitely not a good omen. So, that's everything I've got about shadow people: the facts, the theories, the warnings. I realize this has been a long talk, but I wanted to give you the full picture. I hope it sheds some light on what these figures might be and eases any fears or unanswered questions you might have. To wrap up, let me be clear again. I'm not here to preach or convince anyone about spiritual beliefs. I don't know if there's a God, an afterlife, or anything beyond this life. Maybe shadow people are jinns, maybe not. But the rest of what I shared, I believe rings true. If you've had experiences, want to challenge what I've said, or just want to chat about it more, I'd love to hear from you. This mystery is still unfolding, and maybe together, we can get closer to the truth. You know, it wasn't until fairly recently that I realized what I consider the strongest evidence that I might actually be communicating with a spirit through the Ouija board. It's not the strange information that comes through. It's not the details I later look up and discover are accurate. It's something much simpler. Sometimes she doesn't come. Skeptics often say that the planchette is being moved by the subconscious minds of the people touching it. According to that explanation, we're unknowingly creating the conversation ourselves, shaping it around our beliefs and expectations. And I understand that argument, I really do. But for nearly 9 years, I've been speaking with what appears to be the same presence. The first time we made contact, I asked for her name. The planchette slowly spelled out, Marie. I didn't want to lose the connection, assuming there really was one. So I asked whether I could call for her during future sessions. She answered yes. After that, I began every session the same way. Marie, are you here? Most of the time, the planchette would begin moving almost immediately. Over the years, Marie told me that she was a guide. She never called herself a spirit guide, exactly. She simply used the word guide. She explained that she watched over a number of people, whom she called her charges. According to her, part of her role was to help them cross into what she described as a higher realm. She called that place peace. She also spoke about attending something like a life review, where a person's experiences could be observed and understood from a wider perspective. Marie said I was one of about 40 people under her care. Now, perhaps 98% of the time, when I call her, she responds. But every so often, nothing happens. The board stays still. My partner and I wait, ask again, and eventually end the session. Then I'll return a day or two later, call for Marie, and she'll suddenly be there. Whenever that happens, I ask why she didn't answer before. Sometimes she says another charge needed her. Other times, she says she was attending a life review. There was one session I remember especially clearly. We had only just begun, and I was halfway through asking a question when the planchette interrupted me. It spelled out, "Must go. A charge is leaving. Peace is close." And then the movement stopped completely. Another time, I came to the board with a long page of questions. I was firing them off one after another, barely pausing between them. Suddenly, Marie refused to continue. She told me I was asking too much, too quickly, and that the intensity of it was disturbing her. The session ended soon after that. Since then, I've changed the way I approach the board. I ask fewer questions, and I focus mainly on personal growth and spiritual development, because that seems to be what she cares about most. I don't want to treat the connection carelessly. Whether it comes from a spirit, the subconscious, or something we don't yet understand, it has become meaningful to me. There have been other unusual moments too. Marie has occasionally given us words or information that neither my partner nor I recognized. Later, I've searched for those details and found that they were accurate. Of course, skeptics have an explanation for that. They might say we encountered the information years ago and stored it somewhere in our subconscious minds without remembering it consciously. That's possible. But the missed sessions are harder for me to explain. My partner and I always expect Marie to appear. We sit down believing the conversation will happen. We certainly don't expect her to interrupt a session, leave because someone else needs her, or refuse to continue because I'm overwhelming her. Those moments don't support our expectations. They disrupt them. And that's why, after all these years, the strongest evidence for me isn't what Marie says when she arrives. It's what happens when she doesn't. A few years ago, my best friend and I were driving through northern Utah when we decided to spend the night at a group of hot springs I'd visited several times before. I'd always felt comfortable there. It was a peaceful place where travelers camped overnight, soaked in the water, and usually kept a respectful distance from one another. There were 3 pools spread across the area: a steaming hot spring, a warm one, and a cooler pool near a small wooden platform. You could see each pool from the others, but they were far enough apart to give everyone some privacy. We left later than planned and didn't arrive until almost midnight. A few other campers were nearby, which made us feel safer, especially since it was just the 2 of us. We parked between the warm and cool springs, folded down the back seats, and made a little sleeping area inside the car. We left our sandals beside the door and cracked the windows to let some air in. Sometime during the night, my friend woke up because she heard strange noises outside. She said they sounded like birds moving around near the car, so she didn't think much of it and eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, at around 7:30, I woke up and noticed an old maroon pickup parked surprisingly close to us. A man was standing beside it. He was barefoot, with a shaved head, and he was behaving in a way that immediately made me uncomfortable. He kept pacing in small circles, making a high-pitched whistling sound through his hands, and staring straight up at the sky. My friend noticed him too, and we didn't even need to discuss it. We quietly agreed to skip our morning swim and leave as quickly as possible. I climbed into the driver's seat and started gathering our things. Then I glanced over at the man. He suddenly stopped moving. He straightened his entire body and turned toward our car in this stiff, unnatural motion. It didn't look like the way a person normally turns. It was slow, deliberate, almost mechanical. Then he started coming toward us. He wasn't exactly running, but he was moving quickly, taking these sharp, hurried steps while his body swayed strangely from side to side. At that point, I was terrified. My friend was still in the back, trying to get everything together, and I remember sitting there thinking, what is about to happen? I was too frightened to keep watching him, so I looked down and tried to focus on finding the keys. A moment later, he was right beside my window. He was standing so close that I could only see his legs and the lower half of his body. I completely froze. My friend and I were whispering to each other, trying to decide whether we should lock the doors, start the car, or yell for help. Then he bent down. Without warning, he started screaming, "Help! Help! Help!" He was shouting at the top of his lungs while pounding both hands against my window. The sound was so loud and sudden that I couldn't even process what was happening. It felt as though my mind had simply stopped working. He continued for what felt like forever, though it was probably only 15 or 20 seconds. Then, just as suddenly as he had started, he stopped. He stood upright. He turned around, and then he walked back toward his truck. Each movement was separate and strangely precise, almost as though someone were controlling him one motion at a time. The second he was far enough away, I started the car and drove off as fast as I safely could. We didn't even stop to grab the sandals we had left outside. To this day, I still don't know what happened. Maybe he was confused, intoxicated, or having some kind of medical or psychological episode. Part of me has also wondered whether there was something else going on, something I can't explain. What frightens me most is that it didn't happen in the darkness. The sun was already up. Everything was clearly visible, and somehow that made it feel even more real. Sometimes I think about the noises my friend heard during the night. I wonder whether they were actually birds, or whether that man had been circling our car while we were asleep. I'm deeply grateful that we got away safely and that nothing worse happened. But I've never been able to forget the way he moved, the sound of him screaming, or the sight of him standing beside my window. Has anyone else ever experienced something this unsettling? What do you think was happening to him? The women in my family have always been sensitive. They feel things. They know things they probably shouldn't know. They see things that don't make sense. But I don't know if any of them ever went through something like what happened to me. To be fair, I was the only one heavily using heroin at the time, so maybe that had something to do with it. I've thought about that a lot. I'm not trying to pretend I was in a clear state of mind back then, but there were parts of this that other people saw too. That's what still gets me. After it happened, I got up and went downstairs, just trying to shake it off. I was standing at the kitchen sink for a minute when I suddenly realized someone was behind me. I turned, and my mom was in the corner crying, almost frozen there. She looked terrified. She told me she had just seen this hag-like demon in a dream, laughing right in her face. And this was happening at the exact same time I had been upstairs, ready to swing on this shadow figure in my room. I didn't tell her what I saw. I just stood there, scared out of my mind. Over the next few days, things got worse. The whole house felt charged, like something ugly had been stirred up and was walking around looking for cracks to crawl into. My parents got into this massive fight about ancient stuff, things from 40 years ago. I walked into the room like, "What is going on with you two?" Then suddenly they both turned on me. They started bringing up my problems from 20 years back, things that had nothing to do with the moment. I could feel myself getting angry, but it was strange. It almost felt like being high, like something in me wanted to fight them. Then this thought came into my head, clear as a bell. This is something evil. Right at that same moment, my mom snapped out of it and screamed, "There's evil in my house!" That chilled me. It was like we both came to the same realization at the exact same second. And it wasn't just our house. That week, my neighborhood started going off like a string of firecrackers. The next day, one neighbor was throwing her husband's clothes out the front door. A few days later, another couple down the street had the police separating them in the yard. This was not that kind of street. It was quiet, peaceful. Nothing ever really happened there. So when all of that started happening at once, It felt obvious to me that something had moved in. Now, maybe someone could say all of this was imagination, stress, drugs, family tension. I could understand that, except for what happened the day before I saw the shadow man. My ex, Kara, showed up at my door for the first time in years. She looked completely gone, like something had hollowed her out from the inside. She was desperate, clinging to me like she was drowning. I had known her for over 20 years in that life, and I had never seen her that bad. I put her in the back room, made coffee, tried to calm her down. I was gone maybe 3 minutes when my mom came running downstairs and said, "She could be overdosing right now." I said, "She's not overdosing." But as soon as I said it, the words echoed in my head. And I knew. She was. We barely saved her life. Then the next day, everything with the shadow man started. Later, I talked to a mutual friend of Kara's. He told me he had seen the shadow man too, around the same time she had come over to his place. He said it smacked a table and got right in his face to wake him up. When he opened his eyes, his own mother called out and asked, "What was that bang?" So he knew it wasn't just in his head either. When Kara got out of the hospital, before I told her anything about what had been happening, she said she felt like something had been attached to her. That made me a believer in a way I wasn't before. The part that still bothers me most is the way that thing moved across my room. It didn't just appear. It strutted, chest out, hands on hips, swaying like it wanted attention. Like it was saying, "Look at me." Then it bolted toward the door, fast and cartoonish, but wrong. I still don't know how I beat it there. And yes, I yelled at it. I cursed it out. I threatened it. That was usually my first reaction. But the visits kept happening until I started praying and stopped messing around with drugs. Once I cleaned that part of my life up, the house calmed down almost completely. It still comes around once in a great while. When I feel it, I don't even say anything at first. I just wait. Usually my mom will come into the room and tell me she feels it too. And when she does, I already know. At one point, it felt like it was coming by once a week, then once a month, then every few months. Now it's been about a year since I felt it for sure. And honestly, I'm grateful for the quiet. I grew up in a house where strange things happened so often that, after a while, they stopped feeling strange. At first, it scared my parents. I mean, how could it not? Doors slammed on their own, lights behaved like they had opinions, footsteps crossed empty rooms. But for my sisters and me, it became pretty clear that whatever was in that house wasn't there to hurt us. Honestly, I think it was protecting us. My parents were not easy people back then. My dad drank hard, and my mom struggled with alcohol, pills, and a personality that could turn a room cold before anything supernatural ever had the chance. Home was tense, loud, unpredictable. The kind of place where you learn to read footsteps, cabinet doors, the way someone breathed before they walked into a room. One Saturday morning, when I was about 12 or 13, my mom cornered me in the kitchen. She was screaming, calling me a nasty little brat, saying things no mother should say to her child. Most days, I could let it roll off me, but that day, it landed deep. I was a good kid, honor roll, no trouble, no drugs, barely even had a social life. I was the kind of kid adults usually praised, and there I was being ripped apart in my own kitchen. Then the back door flew open and slammed so hard that the small diamond-shaped windows shattered. My mom stopped instantly. She forgot all about me and turned her attention to the door, trying to figure out what had happened. And while she was distracted, I slipped out and went to a friend's house until her mood burned itself out. That was the first time I remember thinking, something here is watching out for us. Another time, I was 16. I had one friend I trusted enough to bring home. Her name was Laura, and she already knew what my house was like. I never invited anyone else over. It would have been humiliating. My parents were usually drunk, sloppy, and unpredictable. One night, Laura stayed over. We got home right at midnight, just like I'd been told to. But when we pulled up, I saw the kitchen light was still on. My heart sank. If the kitchen light was on, that meant one of my parents was awake, and I did not want to walk into that room. I turned to Laura and asked, "What do we do?" She pointed behind me and said, "What is that?" I turned around and saw this glowing orange ball, about the size of a basketball, floating and bouncing through the air. It was bright, almost playful. We got out of the car and started chasing it around the yard. Every time we got close, it darted away. This went on for maybe 10 minutes. Then, just like that, it disappeared. I looked back at the house, and the kitchen light was off. Whatever that glowing thing was, it had kept us outside just long enough for it to be safe to go in. My oldest sister had one of the clearest experiences, though. She was 18 and still living at home. It was summer in Iowa, hot and heavy the way only the Midwest can be. My parents were out of town. I was sleeping over at a friend's house, and my other sister was somewhere else. So my oldest sister and her fiancé, Brian, had the house to themselves. For reasons I still find hilarious, they lit a fire in the fireplace on this hot summer day and sat together on the couch. They were engaged, young, and things started getting romantic. But the closer Brian got to my sister, the colder the room became. Not just a little chilly, cold. So cold they could see their breath. When he backed away, the room warmed up again. When he moved close, it turned icy. That happened nearly 50 years ago, and until the day my dad died and the house was sold, Brian refused to go into that house alone. Then there were the kitchen lights. The kitchen had 3 lights controlled by one switch. You flipped the switch, all 3 lights came on. Simple, normal. Until one day, only 2 came on. My dad was an engineer, so this drove him nearly out of his mind. He changed the bulb, checked the wiring, took things apart, put them back together. Nothing worked. He even hired electricians, and none of them could find anything wrong. One day he was standing in the kitchen, completely fed up, and he snapped. He said, "Bill, for God's sake, turn the damn light back on." And it came on, just like that. From then on, whenever that light went out, the only way to get it back on was to ask Bill. Bill was the man who had built the house. Bill Harris, or at least that's what everyone called him. He had been a contractor, and his dream was to build his own home on that hill. In the late 60s or early 70s, he was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Once he knew his time was limited, he poured everything into finishing that house. He even brought in over 100 truckloads of dirt to raise the hill higher before building on it. By the time he died, the house was mostly a shell. It still needed floors and ceilings and finishing work, but it was livable. He lived there. He died there too. Afterward, his children scattered his ashes in the front yard. There were endless stories. My dad would be downstairs in the garage on a Saturday, working on some woodworking project, and he would hear footsteps pacing back and forth in the living room directly above him. Clear as anything. Back and forth. Back and forth. Thinking someone had broken in, he'd grab a hammer and run upstairs. No one was ever there. Once, when I was around 6th grade, my parents were out for the evening, and I was at my friend's house next door. We realized my house was empty, and of course, to a couple of kids, that sounded wonderful. So we walked over. Every single light in the house was on. The whole place was glowing. That was one of the only times it really unsettled me. I knew I hadn't left the lights on. That house was big, with switches everywhere. Turning on every light would have taken effort. It wasn't something you did by accident. We got my friend's dad, Leonard, and he walked over with us. He kept saying I must have left them on. I knew I hadn't. Then we got to the front door, and it was locked. That was impossible. You needed a key to lock the deadbolt, and I hadn't brought one. I had left the door unlocked. Leonard lifted my friend up to the balcony outside my parents' bedroom, and she got in through the sliding glass door. The moment she stepped inside, the whole house went dark. Not one light was on. Leonard made both of us go back to his house until my parents came home. But most of the time, it didn't feel scary. Not to us kids, anyway. My parents had a few experiences that unnerved them, but my sisters and I never felt threatened. One day, when I was about 16, I was home alone. There was a man doing some work outside for my dad. I don't remember what kind of work, only that he made me uncomfortable. He had that wrong kind of energy. Then he came into the house without being invited. He started yelling, acting wild, and I froze. I was slowly backing toward one of the panic buttons my dad had installed around the house. If you pressed one, the alarm screamed, the police were called, and my dad's office got an alert. I was reaching for it, but before I could touch it, the alarm went off. Someone had already pushed the button. The man panicked and wanted out immediately, which was perfectly fine with me. Within minutes, the police arrived, and so did my dad. I kept telling everyone, I didn't press it. Nobody would have blamed me if I had. That was exactly what the button was for, but I knew I hadn't touched it. The police asked my dad why I was insisting I hadn't done it. My dad looked at me and asked, "Who pushed it?" I said quietly, "Bill." And my dad understood. Things went missing all the time, too. Not money, not jewelry, nothing anyone would steal. Just ordinary objects. A tool, a spool of thread, a kitchen utensil. You could search for days and find nothing. Then someone would finally say, "Bill, put it back." And there it would be. So I grew up with this. Ghosts, spirits, hauntings, whatever people want to call them, they don't scare me. That was my childhood. I think it's part of why, later in life, I was able to develop as a medium. I didn't have the same fear of the unknown that other people seem to carry. I had never been given a reason to fear it. My parents weren't exactly thrilled with Bill, but we kids were never afraid of him. I remember when The Exorcist, or maybe the Amityville Horror, came on TV after being in theaters. My dad turned it off immediately. He said we weren't allowed to watch it because he didn't want Bill getting any ideas. And he was serious. So when people tell me they saw a ghost or heard something in their house and they're terrified, I understand why they feel that way. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I always think, yeah, and? Because for me, it was normal. I could tell stories about that house for days. But looking back now, especially knowing what our home life was like, I appreciate Bill more than I did then. I think he knew we needed someone, or something. I was the youngest and the last one to move out. After I left, Bill seemed to leave too. I've always believed his work was done. Honestly, I still don't know what kind of ghost or presence that could have been. But if it sounded like someone you know, especially someone who lives in the house with you, then I'd wonder if you might have dealt with a mimic. Now, what mimics actually are, I couldn't tell you with any certainty. People usually describe them as spirits or entities that imitate familiar voices. almost like they're trying to pull your attention somewhere. And the reason I say that is because something very close to that happened to me. Years ago, my husband and I moved in with my parents after my father was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia. We wanted to help my mother care for him and keep him at home for as long as possible. He passed away in 2022, and not long after that, my mother's health started getting worse too. She has vascular dementia, so we stayed with her, hoping we could keep her at home as well. This happened maybe 2 or 3 years ago, after my dad had already passed. I was having one of those restless nights where sleep just would not come, so I went downstairs to the living room. My husband and my mom were both upstairs asleep. Just to explain the layout a little, all 3 bedrooms are upstairs. My mom's room is the second door on the left at the top of the stairs, and mine and my husband's room is the second door on the right. From the recliner downstairs, I can see the staircase, but I can't see the very top landing. It was around 2 in the morning. I was sitting in the recliner with the TV on mute, reading, when I suddenly heard my mom call my name from the top of the stairs. Clear as anything. It wasn't faint. It wasn't like a thought in my head. It sounded exactly like her, standing right up there. So I called back, "What?" Nothing answered. I waited a second, then got up and walked to the bottom of the stairs. I looked up, fully expecting to see her standing there in the hallway. But there was nobody there, and I could see that her bedroom door was closed. That already felt wrong, but then I thought about the dog. My mom has this little Jack Russell named Pickles, and he is glued to her. I mean, that dog follows her everywhere. If she gets up in the night, I usually hear him before I hear her. His little paws, his tags, something. If she had come out of her room and stood at the top of the stairs, he would have been right there with her. But I hadn't heard him at all. So I hurried upstairs and opened her bedroom door, saying, "What did you need?" The room was completely dark. My mom was in bed, half asleep. She lifted her head a little, confused and groggy, and asked me if I was okay, like she thought I was the one who needed something. I could tell immediately she had been sleeping hard. There was just no way she had been out in the hall, called down to me, gone back into her room, shut the door, turned off the lights, gotten into bed, and fallen asleep again that fast. She was in her early 80s by then, and she had already started moving more slowly. She had some balance issues too, so it wasn't like she could have rushed around silently. And then I saw Pickles on the bed beside her. He had just lifted his head too, like I had woken him up. He had clearly been asleep the whole time. That should have been enough to convince me something strange had happened, but there was one more thing. My cat, Luna, had been downstairs with me. She was sitting near the recliner, grooming herself, when I heard my mom's voice. The second that voice called out, Luna snapped her head toward the stairs. Not casually, not like she was just looking around. She reacted like she heard it too. That's the part I can't shake, because if it had just been my imagination, why would my cat have looked straight toward the same place the voice came from? So, no, I don't know what it was, but I know what I heard. And I know I wasn't the only one who heard it. I'm not really sure what to make of the sleep paralysis part of it, but I can tell you about a few experiences I've had that sound pretty close to what you described. I dealt with sleep paralysis pretty regularly from the time I was about 17 until my early 30s. A handful of those episodes were like that sudden, full-speed shift you mentioned, where a calm, harmless dream turns into something terrifying almost instantly. The one I remember most clearly happened around early autumn in 2005. I was having this quiet dream where I was standing in the back garden of the house I grew up in, just looking up at the night sky. It felt peaceful. Nothing strange, nothing threatening. Then one of the stars started to move. At first, it was just a tiny shift, almost like my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then, it came down fast. Within a few seconds, it was right in front of me, and I realized it wasn't a star at all. It was an enormous eye, maybe the size of a dinner plate, hovering close to my face and staring straight at me. That was when I snapped into sleep paralysis. It was the only time in my life that I actually woke someone else up while it was happening. My girlfriend at the time heard me making this awful groaning sound in my sleep. In my mind, I was screaming as hard as I could, but what came out was barely more than a low, strained noise. At first, she thought maybe I had knocked over a glass of water from the bedside table and was trying to shake it off. Then she got scared and thought I might be having a seizure. She tried to wake me, but she couldn't. Eventually, I came out of it the way I usually did, all at once, terrified, heart pounding, completely disoriented. That experience stuck with me because it was the only real proof I ever had that during sleep paralysis, I can't actually make the sounds I think I'm making. In my head, I'm yelling. In reality, I'm barely making a noise at all. I don't know if that connects to what happened to you, but it feels worth mentioning. The second experience I want to share happened much more recently. I hadn't had sleep paralysis in maybe 14 or 15 years, and then last winter, it came back out of nowhere. I was alone in a hotel room in Milwaukee. It was sometime after 1 in the morning, maybe around 1:20. There wasn't a dream leading into it, not that I remember. I just suddenly had the sensation that I was being dragged off the bed. And it felt completely real. I could feel the texture of the quilted blanket under me, those raised little seams pressing and scraping against my back, my arms, and my legs as I was pulled. I could see the small kitchenette through the open doorway, lit by the dim light over the stove. The room was quiet, but the feeling was that something was pulling me toward the foot of the bed and toward that doorway. It didn't feel like hands were grabbing me. It was more like a force, something invisible. I couldn't move. I couldn't wake myself up. It went on for what felt like a full minute, though I know time is strange during these episodes. The strangest part was that even though I felt myself being dragged toward the doorway seemed to be getting farther away. Then I became aware of something beside me. It felt very close, maybe a foot from the left side of my face. I tried to turn my head toward it, but I couldn't. Then I tried to move only my eyes, and somehow that worked. I looked toward it. I can't really describe what I saw. It was just a dark shape, more like a dense shadow than a person. But the second I noticed it, the fear became overwhelming. That was when I finally woke myself up, making the same low groaning sound I had made all those years before. I wish I had answers. I really do. But I don't. All I can do is share what I've experienced, because it sounds like we may be asking some of the same questions. Over the years, the few things I've learned about my own sleep paralysis are these. I can't move my body, but if I focus hard enough, I can sometimes move my eyes. My body can twitch, apparently more than I realize, but that's about it. I can't make any sound louder than a low groan, and even that probably wouldn't be noticed unless someone was right beside me. There is always something there. I don't know what it is or what it's supposed to mean. Sometimes I don't notice it right away. Sometimes it feels like it notices me first, or it makes me aware of it. That's honestly the part that has always frightened me the most. The only way I've ever been able to wake myself up is by looking directly at it. For years, these episodes would stretch on until whatever the thing was finally looked at me. Eventually, I realized that if I forced myself to look at it first, I could usually break out of the paralysis faster. It's still terrifying every time. Even when I fully understand, in the moment, that I'm experiencing sleep paralysis, it doesn't really help. Knowing what it is doesn't take away the fear. It doesn't take away the helplessness. One other thing that might matter is that I used to have a lot of lucid dreams in my 20s. Most of them were fine, even fascinating. But once in a while, a lucid dream would turn into sleep paralysis. Going from being completely in control to suddenly feeling like something else had control of me was deeply unsettling. Those were some of the hardest episodes to shake off. I don't think anyone can force you to believe in ghosts. Honestly, I wouldn't believe in them either if I didn't have a few experiences that have stayed solid in my mind, even after growing up and becoming a lot more practical, tired, and boring. The one I remember most clearly happened when I was 15. I was at a boarding school in Alaska, and it was around midnight, but because it was summer, the room was still full of light. The curtains were open, and nothing about the moment felt creepy at all. It was the last night of the school year, and graduation was the next day. My older brothers were flying in the next morning because my sister was graduating, and I was genuinely excited to see everyone. I was lying on the bottom bunk, and my roommate, my best friend at the time, Marin, was on the top bunk. I remember saying something like, "I can't wait for my family to get here." And then, right next to my ear, I heard this raspy voice say, "We are your family." It sounded close, not across the room, not from the top bunk, right by my ear, close enough that it felt like whoever or whatever said it was breathing on me. You know that feeling when someone whispers right beside your ear and your whole body knows exactly how near they are? It was that. Neither of us said anything for what felt like forever. Maybe 20 seconds, maybe less, but it stretched out in that strange way fear does. I don't remember the exact words we said afterward. I just remember both of us realizing we had heard it. Marin climbed down into my bunk, and we hid under the covers like little kids until I called my mom because I needed to hear a real, familiar voice. For some reason, I always thought of the voice as female, even though it was too rough and distorted to really tell. Years later, I asked Marin what she remembered, and she told me she heard it too, but from farther away. That part still bothers me. What made it worse was that those dorms had never felt completely normal to me. I had disturbing nightmares there all the time, and I went through repeated episodes of sleep paralysis. There were so many nights where I woke up terrified and told myself I was hallucinating, or that I was still half asleep, or that my brain was just playing tricks on me. But looking back, it felt like something in that place was feeding on me somehow. I know that sounds dramatic, but that is the only way I can describe the heaviness of it. Hearing, "We are your family," scared me because part of me thought whatever it was might follow me home. Thankfully, it didn't. It stayed in the dorms. After that, I stopped watching paranormal horror movies completely. I don't want that kind of energy around me. I really do think those experiences contributed to the depression and anxiety I was dealing with at that age. It felt like I was carrying something dark that didn't belong to me. And now that I'm thinking about it, another memory comes back from when I was 14, at a girls' camp in Alaska. My friend and I had spent the whole week scaring ourselves over paranormal stuff. To be honest, I didn't fully trust what she was saying by then. A few years later, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and even at the time, I wondered if she was struggling or exaggerating. She kept saying there was an entity following her. Still, I wonder if focusing on it so much, mixed with the place we were in, invited something in. It was around 3 in the morning on the last night of camp, so everyone was allowed to stay up and wander around. Again, because it was June in Alaska, it wasn't really dark. Everything had that pale blue twilight glow. We were the only ones in the cabin, just sitting there talking. The cabin had wooden bunk beds, and at one point she set the plastic cap from her drink on the top edge of her bunk, facing mine. Then the cap flew sideways off the rim. Not rolled, not slipped. It shot off like someone had flicked it hard. We both froze, then panicked and left the cabin. Outside, the air had that quiet, blue, early morning stillness. You could see everything clearly. We walked a few feet past the cabin when she started getting scared again. She told me to look between the trees because she saw something strange. At first, I thought she was just making it worse on purpose, because by that point my trust in her had worn thin. But I looked anyway. Between two tall trees, maybe only a few feet apart, I saw these marks hanging in the air. I still don't know how to explain them properly. They looked almost like speed marks in a video game, the kind that trail behind something moving fast before fading away. There were 3 of them, and they were purple. They just hovered there in the air, then slowly disappeared. That part has never made sense to me, not even in a paranormal way. It was just strange, and I have never known what to do with it. So no, I don't think anyone can make you believe in ghosts or anything beyond this world. I know how it sounds when I say it out loud. I know it probably sounds ridiculous, and I don't blame anyone who wouldn't believe me. But the one comfort I take from it is this: I know there is something beyond what we are usually allowed to see or touch. Something just outside the edge of ordinary life. I think it's still important to stay thoughtful and a little skeptical when we're trying to understand unusual experiences. Not dismissive exactly, but careful. I'm sharing this for you to consider because, honestly, you're the one who knows your own experience best. When we're teenagers, the brain goes through a lot of changes. One of those changes is called synaptic pruning, where the brain sort of clears out connections it doesn't need anymore as we grow into adulthood. From what I understand, that can sometimes affect memory, and in some cases, it may even contribute to odd perceptions or hallucinations. So if that explanation feels right to you, maybe that's what happened. But I'll be honest, I'm not a psychologist. I've just read about these things because I've had my own experiences and wanted to understand them better. That said, what you described doesn't really sound like the kinds of hallucinations people usually talk about at that age. It sounds much more vivid than that. I had an experience that felt a little similar, though mine wasn't as physical or clear as yours seemed to be. A lot of the things I've experienced are more like my vision gives me a hint that something is there. I might see a shimmer, a flutter, or some kind of distortion in the air, and then my brain fills in the rest with surprising clarity. If I didn't stop and think about it, I'd probably just say, yes, I saw it. And in a way, I did. I saw enough for my mind to understand the whole shape of it. This happened when I was living on the opposite side of the country. I was in my kitchen, standing at the sink. That apartment had always felt active to me, spiritually speaking, and the whole area had that same charged feeling, like the air had old stories folded into it. While I was at the sink, something came up behind me on my right side. It was tall, very tall, maybe around 7.5 feet. It was thin, almost stretched looking, and it had this long brown face covered in spiky fur or hair. The face was so strange that later on, I wondered whether it might have been some kind of old ceremonial mask, or maybe even the spirit of someone wearing one. But it didn't feel threatening. It simply asked what I was doing. That was the feeling I got from it. Curiosity. Not hunger, not anger, not anything dark. Just curiosity. Almost gentle. Sometimes I think we get startled, and the moment we react, whatever state of mind lets us perceive something like that just snaps shut. Then the thing disappears. That's what happened with me. The connection broke, and it was gone. But the feeling it left behind was surprisingly warm. Friendly, even. Not just harmless, but positive. It felt like an ally, somehow. I haven't encountered that particular presence again, but I'm glad it's around. I should add something because I keep thinking of details after the fact. At the time, my first impression was that it was not human. It was only more than a month later that I started wondering whether maybe it had been human-shaped and wearing something like a mask. The entire figure seemed covered in that same rough, spiky brown hair or fur. And when I say my brain showed me what it looked like, I don't mean it was vague or imagined afterward. It happened in real time. It was immediate, the way normal sight is immediate. My eyes caught the distortion, and my mind somehow gave it form. That's the best way I can explain it. I don't think there's anything else to add. I worked in a retirement facility for about 9 years, and the place had a history you could feel before anyone even told you about it. The building went up in the late 1800s, and for most of its life, it had been a psychiatric hospital and asylum. It stayed that way until sometime in the 1980s, but honestly, for the time it was built, it was surprisingly thoughtful. The doctor who started it believed fresh air, gardens, sunlight, quiet, and human connection could help heal people. And considering what they used to call mental illness back then, I don't think he was entirely wrong. The grounds were beautiful, still are actually. Big old brick buildings, wide lawns, trees everywhere, and this strange peaceful feeling sitting underneath all the age of the place. The main building eventually got divided up into different spaces. Part of it became a nicer retirement residence. Another part turned into affordable apartments, and there was also a little market area with shops, cafes, and restaurants. Now, I'm a skeptical person. I don't jump straight to ghosts just because a floorboard creaks or a light flickers. And in all the years I worked there, I only had one experience myself. It was small, not enough to shatter my skepticism, but just odd enough that I still think about it. One day, I was cleaning a resident's apartment. I was in the bathroom when the TV in the living room suddenly turned on. I was the only person in the apartment. I walked out, stared at it for a second, and turned it off. I told myself it was probably a remote glitch, or maybe the TV had some kind of timer. Nothing dramatic. Then, maybe 25 minutes later, I went to clean another apartment. This one was on the floor above, a little farther down the hallway. Same routine. I was in the bathroom cleaning, and the TV in the living room turned on by itself. Again, nobody else was there. I turned it off too. And that was it. It never happened before. Never happened again. Just those two TVs, in two separate apartments, close together but not directly next to each other. Strange, but not impossible. That's the little crack in the door my brain refuses to fully close. Other people, though, had much bigger stories. I used to come in through the market area in the mornings, and there was this small shop I passed all the time. A couple mornings a month, the same little section would be messed up. Stickers and brochures from a shelf would be scattered on the floor, and sometimes a few shirts hanging above them would be down too. Not the whole store, not random merchandise, just that one spot, over and over again. My supervisor once told me she saw one of the service carts move on its own while it was parked in the hall. Not roll a little because of a slant. Move. The salon manager had a story that still gives me a cold little pinch in the ribs. One winter day, she saw a small boy looking through the break room window. He was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, which already made no sense because it was freezing outside. She went to look, and he was just gone. There wasn't really anywhere he could have run to that quickly. But the strangest one, to me, came from a resident. One night, a resident asked why a nurse had been crawling on the floor. There was no nurse crawling on the floor. That one bothered me more than I wanted to admit. We also had a pendant alarm system for the residents. They could press a button if they needed help, and it would alert the nurses' phones. Those pendants were expensive and reliable. They were not supposed to just go off for no reason. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, alarms would trigger while residents were asleep and nowhere near the buttons. People tried to explain it away, of course. Everyone always does. Batteries, signals, pressure, bad luck. But it happened often enough that the night staff definitely had opinions. The kitchen was supposed to be the real hotspot. From what I heard, that area used to be near the children's ward. My cousin worked in the kitchen for a while, and he said a couple times a year, pots and pans would somehow end up stacked neatly in the middle of the floor. Not thrown, not crashed down, stacked. And the strangest part was, nobody ever heard it happen. They'd look away for a few seconds, or step into another section, and when they turned back, there it was. A tower of pans sitting where no tower of pans had been. There are also tunnels underneath the buildings, old service tunnels running under the property. You can take tours through parts of them now. Years ago, just knowing those tunnels were down there would have terrified me. But after learning more about the hospital's history, it stopped feeling so dark to me. There was sadness there, I'm sure. There had to be. But there was also care. Real care. The people who designed that place thought about light, air, gardens, dignity, and comfort. They wanted the patients to have beauty. They wanted them to feel human. So whatever is still there, if anything is still there, I don't feel afraid of it anymore. I think some places hold on to pain, but maybe some places hold on to kindness too. I had a great aunt by marriage and a grandmother, my mom's stepmother, who absolutely could not stand each other. I mean, they had the kind of tension where even the air in the room seemed to know it should behave. What makes this strange is that they passed away only a day apart. My great aunt, whose name I'll call Aunt Marla, passed first. Then my grandmother, who I'll call Grandma Elaine, passed the next day. But I didn't find out about Aunt Marla until 3 days after she was gone. It started on a Friday morning, 2 days before Grandma Elaine passed. I woke up and just could not get Aunt Marla out of my head. It wasn't just a random memory either. It felt like that feeling you get when someone is standing near you, watching you, and your body turns before your brain even catches up. Except every time I turned around, nobody was there. But the strange part was, I kept expecting to see her. I hadn't seen her in probably 2 or 3 years at that point. She lived about 20 minutes across town, and when I was younger, we only visited her a handful of times a year. I didn't have her home phone number, and this was back when cell phones weren't everywhere. They were still kind of a luxury in my family, especially for older relatives who didn't see the point in paying for some new little gadget when the house phone worked just fine. So in my teenage mind, I brushed it off. I remember thinking, this is weird. I haven't seen her in forever, so why am I suddenly thinking about her so much? Well, I'll probably see her soon enough. But all day long, it kept happening. I would feel like she was there, like she wanted to tell me something. And I would turn, fully expecting to see her standing there, and there would be nothing. Then Saturday morning came, and it happened again. Only this time, it was Grandma Elaine. I kept getting that same feeling, that same strange pull, like she was close by and trying to get my attention. I'd turn around, expecting her to be there, and again, nobody was there. Sometimes I felt both of them at the same time, Aunt Marla and Grandma Elaine, which made it even stranger. But because they disliked each other so much, I told myself maybe my brain was just connecting them. Like once I thought of one, the other automatically came with it. At the time, I had also just gone through a breakup with my boyfriend, and we had gotten back together about a week later, so my emotions were already a little scrambled. I kept trying to push the feeling away and focus on normal teenage life things. I remember thinking, first Aunt Marla, now Grandma Elaine. This is really weird. I'll just go see Grandma after school on Monday. Again, this was back in the Nokia and Sony Ericsson days. Text messages cost money. Minutes were prepaid. You didn't just casually call and text everyone all day. So it felt reasonable to wait. Then, Sunday morning, I woke up feeling completely awful. Not emotionally awful. Physically awful. It felt like a bad hangover mixed with the flu. My whole body ached. I felt drained, heavy, wrecked. But the strangest part was that the presence I had felt before was gone. I didn't feel Aunt Marla. I didn't feel Grandma Elaine. I just felt this deep, empty quiet. Later that evening, my boyfriend checked a missed call and voicemail. I remember watching his face go pale. He called the number back, and that's when we found out. My grandfather had been trying to reach people, but he was using the only landline available to call Grandma Elaine's side of the family first. Someone had borrowed a cell phone so the message could get around. Grandma Elaine had passed away in her sleep, in a diabetic coma, sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning on Sunday. Then, on Monday afternoon, my grandfather found out about Aunt Marla. She had passed away in the hospital from complications from a bronchial infection, sometime between 5 and 6 in the morning on Saturday. I didn't hear that news until Tuesday, and when I finally put the timeline together, it stopped me cold. Friday, I felt Aunt Marla. Saturday morning, she was gone. Saturday, I felt Grandma Elaine. Sunday morning, she was gone. I don't know exactly what to call it. I just know what it felt like. It felt like they came close before they left. Like they wanted me to know, in their own separate ways, that I was loved. Maybe they wanted me to know they were okay. Maybe they were making peace. Maybe both. And the strangest thing is, that wasn't the only time something like that happened. Over the years, I experienced it with 4 more people, 6 people total. Only one of them wasn't family. So I don't really dismiss that feeling anymore. When someone comes to mind that strongly, when it feels less like a thought and more like a knock on the door, I pay attention. I had a great aunt by marriage named Aunt Marla, and my grandmother, who was actually my mom's stepmother, and those 2 women could not stand each other. I mean, they truly disliked each other. It wasn't the polite kind of tension where everybody smiles over potato salad and pretends nothing is wrong. No, this was the kind of family feud that had roots, deep ones. And the strange thing is, they passed away only a day apart. Aunt Marla went first, and then my grandmother passed the next day. But I didn't find out about Aunt Marla until 3 days after she was already gone. It started on a Friday morning. I was a teenager then, and for some reason, I could not get Aunt Marla out of my head. It wasn't just a random thought either. It felt almost like when you sense somebody watching you, so you turn around expecting to see someone there. Except, nobody was there. But every time I turned, I had this very specific feeling that I was supposed to see her. Aunt Marla. Not just anyone. I hadn't seen her in maybe 2 or 3 years at that point, so it made no sense. Still, all day long, I kept feeling like she was trying to tell me something. I would turn around with this weird little certainty in my chest, expecting her to be standing there, and of course, there was nothing. At the time, I just thought, this is so strange. I haven't seen her in forever. Why am I thinking about her so much? But I brushed it off. Back then, it wasn't easy to just call everybody. She lived about 20 minutes across town, and when I was younger, we only visited her a few times a year. Most people in my family didn't really have cell phones yet, and she definitely wasn't the type to spend money on one. She was older, a homebody, and cell phones still felt like a luxury. So I told myself I'd probably see her at the next family visit. Then Saturday morning came, and the same thing started happening again. Only this time, it was my grandmother. I kept feeling like she was there, like she wanted to say something to me. I would turn, expecting to see her, and again, no one would be there. Sometimes I would feel both of them at the same time, which made it even stranger. But because they had hated each other so much, my teenage brain tried to make it make sense. I thought maybe thinking of one naturally made me think of the other. Around that same time, I had just broken up with my boyfriend, and then we had gotten back together, so emotionally, my life was already noisy. I kept pushing the feeling about my grandmother to the back of my mind. I remember thinking, first Aunt Marla, now Grandma. This is weird. I'll just go see Grandma after school on Monday. This was during the Nokia and Sony Ericsson era, when texting still cost money per message, and my minutes and texts were prepaid. Once they were gone, they were gone. So again, I didn't reach out. I just figured I would see her soon. Then Sunday morning, I woke up feeling completely wrecked. Not just tired. It felt like a terrible hangover mixed with body aches, almost like the flu. But the strangest part was that the feeling from before was gone. That warm, loving presence I had felt from Aunt Marla and my grandmother wasn't there anymore. It was just empty. Later that evening, my boyfriend checked a missed call and voicemail. I still remember his face going pale. He called the number back, and it turned out to be from a borrowed cell phone. My grandfather had been using the only landline to call my grandmother's side of the family first. She was his second wife, because my biological grandmother had passed away while my mother was pregnant with me. That's when I found out my grandmother had passed in her sleep from a diabetic coma sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning on Sunday. Because the landline at my grandfather's house was being used almost constantly for a day or two, the news about Aunt Marla didn't come through right away. On Monday afternoon, my grandfather found out that Aunt Marla, who was his sister-in-law through my biological grandmother, had passed away in the hospital from complications from a bronchial infection. She had died in the early hours of Saturday morning, somewhere between 5 and 6. I didn't hear about her until Tuesday, and once I did, I started putting everything together. I had felt Aunt Marla before I knew she was gone. Then I felt my grandmother before she passed, too. It was strange, but it didn't feel frightening. It felt more like they wanted me to know something. Maybe that I was loved. Maybe that, somehow, they were okay now. And as if that wasn't enough, this same kind of thing happened to me again with 4 other people over the years. 6 people total. Only one of them wasn't family. I want to tell you about something that still stays with me, because even now, I don't really know how else to explain it. When I was younger, I had a great aunt by marriage, Aunt Maureen, and my grandmother, Grandma Ellen, who absolutely could not stand each other. They were connected through family, but there was no warmth between them. Not really. And strangely enough, they ended up passing away only a day apart. The part that still gives me chills is that I felt something before I knew anything had happened. It started on a Friday morning. I could not get Aunt Maureen out of my head. It wasn't just a passing thought either. It felt almost like when you sense someone watching you, and your body reacts before your mind catches up. I kept turning, fully expecting to see her standing there. But no one was there. And that happened several times throughout the day. I hadn't seen her in at least a couple of years, maybe longer, so it made no sense. But I had this strong feeling that she wanted to tell me something, In my teenage mind, I just thought, this is so weird. I haven't seen her in forever. Maybe I'll see her soon. Back then, it wasn't like today. People in my family didn't all have cell phones. Texting cost money, minutes were limited, and older relatives especially weren't rushing to buy new technology. Aunt Maureen lived about 20 minutes across town, and as a kid, we only visited her a few times a year. So I brushed it off. I figured maybe I would see her at the next family visit. Then Saturday morning came, and the same thing happened again, except this time, it was Grandma Ellen. I kept feeling like she was nearby, like she was trying to get my attention. I would turn, expecting to see her, and again, there was nobody there. Sometimes I felt both of them at once, which made it even stranger, but I convinced myself it was just my mind connecting them because they disliked each other so much. At that point in my life, I had other teenage things going on too. I had just broken up with my boyfriend the week before, and we had recently gotten back together, so my head was already full. I remember thinking, first Aunt Maureen, now Grandma. This is weird. I'll just go see Grandma after school on Monday. But Sunday morning, I woke up feeling completely wrecked. Not sad exactly, not yet. More like my whole body had been drained. It felt like a horrible mix of a hangover and flu aches, just heavy and empty. And the presence I had felt from both of them was gone. That warm, insistent feeling had disappeared. Later that evening, my boyfriend checked a missed call and voicemail. I remember his face going pale. He called the number back, and that's when we found out. Grandma Ellen had passed away in her sleep from a diabetic coma sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning on Sunday. Because my grandfather only had one landline, and it was being used almost constantly to call family, the news was slow to move around. Then on Monday afternoon, my grandfather found out that Aunt Maureen had also passed away. She had died in the hospital from complications related to a bronchial infection sometime between 5 and 6 in the morning on Saturday. I didn't hear that part until Tuesday. And when I finally pieced the timing together, I realized I had felt them before I knew they were gone. I had felt Aunt Maureen before her passing reached me. I had felt Grandma Ellen before anyone told me. It was like each of them came close enough for me to know I was loved, even if I didn't understand it at the time. And maybe, in some way, they wanted me to know they were okay. What makes it even harder to dismiss is that this didn't only happen once. Over the years, I experienced the same kind of thing with 4 more people. 6 people total. Only one of them wasn't family. So I don't really have a perfect explanation for it. I just know what I felt. And I know the timing. And I know that for me, those moments felt like quiet goodbyes before the phone ever rang. The first time I ever felt like someone might have visited from the other side, I was still a kid. It happened after my great-grandma passed away. For 3 nights after her funeral, I saw the shape of a woman standing in my bedroom doorway. And I know how that sounds, but I used to sleep with my door wide open and the hallway light on, so it wasn't like I was staring into pitch-black darkness and letting my imagination run wild. The strange thing is, I wasn't scared. Not even a little. I didn't feel watched in a bad way. I didn't feel creeped out. It felt gentle, almost like she was just checking in before moving on. But the experience that still stays with me the most happened years later, after my dad died. For a little background, my dad was older when I was growing up. He had 2 kids from a previous marriage, my older brother and older sister, and they were already adults with families of their own. I was almost 17, still in school, still very much his kid at home. And my dad absolutely loved NASCAR, especially Dale Earnhardt. The number 3 was everywhere in his life. He had the tattoo, the hats, the shirts, the jackets, the little collectibles. Honestly, if something had that number on it, there was a decent chance he owned it. He even had the mustache for a while, which made the whole thing feel even more like part of who he was. My dad passed away suddenly on Sunday, March 22nd, 2015. 3 days later, something happened that none of us have ever really been able to explain. My older brother's daughter was at school when her phone rang. Of course, she couldn't answer it during class. But when she checked later, the missed call had come from the number 3. Just 3. No full phone number, no area code, nothing she could call back. Just that one digit. Then my sister's husband checked his work phone. He'd had the day off, and the phone had been charging in another room, so he missed it. That call showed up as coming from 1. Then my mom got a call too, but my little brother was already on the phone talking to our aunt when it came through, and he couldn't switch over fast enough. When they checked the call log, the number was 13. So my older brother called my sister after his daughter got home and told everyone what had happened. By then, my sister and her husband had already seen the call on his work phone, and they were pretty shaken up. They reached out to me to ask whether anything weird had happened on our end. And of course, I already knew about the call my mom had gotten. When we compared the times, every one of those calls had come in within a 3-hour window. 3 days after my dad died. 3 calls, all tied to some version of the number 3. And then, at his funeral, something else happened. My dad had a lot of brothers and sisters, but there was one brother he was especially close to. That brother's son got a voicemail on the day of the funeral. His phone was sitting on the counter, and he said it never actually rang, but suddenly it played the voicemail sound. When he checked it, there was a 13-second voicemail. Just static. No number attached to it. Nothing in the call log except a missed call with the number field completely blank. I know people can explain away a lot of things. Phones glitch. Call logs get weird. Grief can make ordinary things feel meaningful. But all of that happening so close together, all connected to the number my dad loved so much, and all within days of losing him? I don't know. It felt like him. It felt like he found the one way he knew we'd recognize. I went with my dad to the last meeting with the pastor before my mother's memorial service. I remember sitting there in that office, trying to hold myself together. I had already chosen the readings for the service. One was from John 11, where it says, Jesus wept. The other was from 1 John 4, about God being love, and how perfect love drives out fear. Those passages felt right because my mom, Marin, had lived with fear for so much of her life. Her death had been sudden, completely unexpected. There were no final words, no goodbye, no gentle ending that gave us time to prepare. One day she was here, and then she wasn't. And the hardest part was that her life had already carried so much suffering. When I was little, around 3 years old, she had surgery to remove a tumor from the front of her brain. It was roughly the size of a golf ball. The surgery saved her life, but it also left damage behind. After that, she struggled with symptoms that looked a lot like OCD. Anxiety and fear became constant companions to her. Her mind was not a peaceful place. It was more like a locked room she could never fully escape. Every night, she would spend ages checking the doors, locking, unlocking, checking again. She was trapped in routines she didn't choose, driven by fears she couldn't silence. So there my dad and I were, sitting across from the pastor, going over the final details. I was trying very hard not to feel too much. I think I had gone numb on purpose, because if I let anything in, I was afraid everything would break open. The pastor told us he had chosen a psalm he wanted to include, as long as we were okay with it. It was Psalm 30. I wasn't very familiar with it at the time, but the line he mentioned was, "You turned my mourning into dancing." Then he said something I will never forget. He said, "I believe that right now your mother is with God, and she is no longer bound by any of the physical or mental limitations she suffered with in this life." And that was when everything changed. It was like time slowed down. Not stopped exactly, but stretched. The room felt different. The air felt warm and thick, almost like the whole office had been filled with something gentle and unseen. My body felt heavy, but not in a frightening way. It was the kind of heaviness you feel when you wake from deep sleep and you are still wrapped in calm. I sank into the chair, completely relaxed. Then I felt warmth move through me, almost like liquid spreading from the center of my body outward. I was startled. I remember trying not to react too visibly because my dad and the pastor were right there, and neither of them seemed to notice anything unusual. But for a few seconds, I felt total peace. Not ordinary peace, not just relief. It was deeper than that. There was no anxiety, no fear, no pain, no worry waiting in the corner, nothing clawing at me. I felt whole in a way I had never felt before. Then I became aware of a presence in the room. I didn't see anything. There was no bright light, no figure standing there, nothing I could point to. But my eyes were pulled upward toward the ceiling, just above where my father was sitting. And I felt something immense. The only way I can describe it is pure goodness. Absolute goodness. Vast, steady, and kind beyond anything I had known. Then a thought came into my mind. It was brief, clear, and not really like my own thoughts. She's okay. She's with God. That was it. I don't know whether it was the Holy Spirit or an angel or something else God allowed me to experience. I honestly don't know. But in that moment, the label didn't matter. A few seconds later, everything returned to normal. The pastor was still talking. My dad was still sitting in his chair. The room looked exactly the same. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had changed. My mother's death had been heartbreaking. The thought of what she may have endured alone was almost unbearable. It felt cruel. It felt wrong. It left a wound in me that I didn't know how to carry. But after that moment, I had something I didn't have before. I had peace. Not because her death was suddenly okay. It wasn't. Not because grief disappeared. It didn't. But because I believed, deep down, that she was no longer suffering. That the fear that had ruled so much of her life was gone. That her mind was free. For just a moment, I felt a tiny piece of what I believe she was experiencing. Perfect peace. And I still thank God for that gift. The pastor had said she was with God, free from every limitation she had known. And in that strange, sacred moment, it felt as though God confirmed it. He had turned her mourning into dancing. I'm not sure I'd call it paranormal exactly. That word feels a bit too neat for it. What I've had are more like strange little openings in ordinary life. Moments where something slips through before I understand what it means. I've had things happen both before and after people died. Sometimes it came as a feeling, sometimes as a flash of information. Once, when I was about 17, I was standing in the kitchen and this thought hit me out of nowhere. I turned to my mom and said, "Someone is going to drown at the beach, but there's going to be a heart attack involved too." I didn't know who. I couldn't place it. It was just there, clear and awful. A few weeks later, A close family friend had a heart attack while swimming at the beach. He didn't survive. I remember feeling sick when we heard, not because I thought I had caused anything, but because I had known something and still hadn't been able to do anything with it. A few months before my grandmother passed, she told me she had this feeling she wouldn't be around much longer. She wasn't being dramatic. She said it very calmly, almost gently. I told her she was absolutely not allowed to haunt me, but she could come and see me in dreams. We both laughed about it. And then, a little while after she died, she did. The dream felt different from normal dreams. It wasn't blurry or random. It felt like sitting down with her again, having one of the conversations we always had. Honest, open, safe. I asked her if she had been scared when she died, and if it hurt. She told me she had been frightened at first, and that yes, there had been pain, but it didn't last. She described one part she hadn't liked, where it felt like something was pulling at her body, almost like thin cords or tendrils, with this strange pins and needles sensation, only stronger. But she said once that passed, everything became calm. She said she felt fine after that, and then she didn't feel pain anymore. Much later, I wondered whether that could have been her circulation stopping, assuming the dream was somehow real. I don't know. I still don't know what to make of it. She also wasn't someone who wore much perfume because she was allergic to so many scents. But she could wear white musk. After she died, we kept smelling it in the house. Not constantly, just now and then, like someone had walked past wearing it. After my cat died, I had a dream a few months later where she took me on one of our little garden walks. That had been our routine when she was alive. She would insist I come outside with her, then she'd stop at plants and sniff them, and she wouldn't move on until I smelled them too, or at least touched the leaves. She was very particular about her garden inspections. In the dream, she led me through the garden like she always did. Then she suddenly began digging at the ground. When she cleared the dirt away, there was a small piece of blue-green stone underneath, like turquoise. I woke up with such a tender feeling, like she had shown me a treasure only she knew about. When my Aunt Maeve was dying, I sat beside her in palliative care and held her hand. By then she couldn't speak anymore. I told her she didn't have to be afraid to let go. I told her we would look after my uncle, and that wherever she was going, I believed it would be beautiful. A few months later, completely out of nowhere, I felt this powerful message from her. It wasn't like hearing a voice with my ears. It was more like the words landed inside me all at once. "I got here and I'm all right, love." That was it. But it felt so much like her that I cried. When I was around 20, I had this strong feeling that I would die of pneumonia one day. At the time, I assumed it meant when I was old. I didn't dwell on it too much, but it stayed in the back of my mind. Then when I was 26, I got pneumonia, and one of my lungs partially collapsed. During that illness, I had what I can only describe as an out-of-body experience. Maybe it was near death. Maybe it was my brain doing something strange under stress. I honestly don't know. But I remember suddenly realizing I wasn't in pain anymore. That was the first thing. The absence of pain felt enormous. Then I could see my body below me. I looked pale, but peaceful. It felt like I was in a corridor somewhere. Not a hospital corridor exactly, but a hallway with doors. I started trying to go through them, because it felt like that was where I was supposed to go. Then a woman appeared. I didn't recognize her, but she felt calm and firm. She told me I couldn't go through those doors yet. I had to go back. I remember being guided back toward my bed. I had the sense that I wasn't alone, that someone stayed with me until I returned to my body. And then the pain came back. That part I remember clearly too. The moment I became aware of my body again, I could feel how much pain I was in, everywhere. It was like being dropped back into a room full of alarms. I still don't know what any of it means. Maybe some of it was dreams. Maybe some of it was grief. Maybe the mind can do extraordinary things when it's under pressure. But there have been too many moments, too many small, impossible details for me to dismiss all of it. And honestly, there's more. A lot more. I've had a lot of strange experiences in my life, and they haven't all looked the same. Some were small, some were terrifying, and some still sit with me in a way I can't really shake. When I was about 13 to 15, I lived in this old house that I honestly believe was haunted, and I don't say that lightly. The things I saw there still give me goosebumps. Even now, when I talk about it, my boyfriend gets uncomfortable, and he is the biggest skeptic you could imagine. He doesn't believe in much of anything paranormal, but he says he can tell I'm not making it up because I go pale. I get chills. I look genuinely scared all over again. In that house, I mostly saw shadow figures. And when I say shadow figures, I don't just mean a weird dark spot in the corner of your eye. I mean something darker than darkness itself. The room could already be pitch black, and somehow these figures would still stand out. They had clear shapes too. A head, shoulders, arms, legs. You could tell it was the outline of a body. Every time I saw one, I felt sick. Not just scared, but heavy and uneasy, like the whole house was pressing down on me. Later on, my sister and I looked into the history of the place, and we found out it was one of the oldest houses in the town. That didn't exactly make me feel better. They didn't only appear at night either. Sometimes in broad daylight, I'd see a head peek out from near the staircase or around a doorway. I'd catch sight of a figure, and the second I noticed it, it would dart away around a corner and vanish. But the longer we lived there, the less they seemed to hide. That house still creeps me out. My friends back then didn't even want to sleep over after the first time because they had their own experiences there. It wasn't just me. But the strange things didn't stop after that house. A few nights ago, something happened that I still don't fully know how to explain. Years ago, my childhood best friend Mara took her own life. I still think about her all the time. I still cry about her. Some grief just doesn't pack its bags and leave, you know? That night, I was completely broken down. It was around 2 in the morning, and I was sitting on the floor sobbing, talking out loud about how much I missed her. I kept thinking about all the things we never got to do together, all the milestones we should have reached side by side, all the versions of life that disappeared when she did. After hours of crying, I opened my eyes and saw this incredibly bright white moth. I don't even know how to describe it properly. It wasn't just pale or shiny. It looked like it was glowing. There were these strange rings or trails around its wings, almost like light marks following it. And then it flew right into my eye. My boyfriend even brought it up the next day. He said I flinched exactly like a real bug had flown straight into my face, but when I looked around, there was nothing there. No moth, no bug, nothing. I grabbed my phone right away and started searching what a white moth could mean, because deep down I felt like it meant something. When I read that, in some Native American beliefs, a moth can be seen as a loved one visiting or checking in, I just broke down even harder. I'm not saying I know for sure that's the meaning. I'm open to being corrected. But Mara was Native American, from the Blackfeet tribe, and that made the whole thing feel so much deeper to me. It felt personal. It felt like she knew I needed something. Even my boyfriend started questioning things after seeing how shaken I was. I also have a haunted doll named Willis. I've had him for about 6 years, and honestly, he has always felt sweet to me. For a long time, I couldn't see him, but little things would happen around him. Small, funny things, gentle things, nothing that made me feel threatened. Then one day, he finally showed himself. He appeared mostly human-shaped, and I could see so many details. His little overalls, his white shirt underneath, his brown hair. But when I looked at his face, especially his eyes and sometimes his nose, it was different. Those parts looked wavy, almost like I was seeing them through water. Everything else was clear, but his face sort of rippled. So yeah, people can believe me or not. I understand why some people won't. But I know what I've seen. I know what I've felt. And I still experience things even now. These stories are barely a tiny piece of everything that's happened to me in my 23 years of life. I've got two strange stories from when I was young, and honestly, they still sit in the back of my mind in a way I don't love. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York. My father's side of the family came from French Huguenots, people who were pushed out of France in the early 1600s and sent across the ocean into a life that was, let's be real, brutal. Some of them ended up tied to fur trade settlements, and over time, quite a few from my father's line were taken in by Native American tribes or joined them willingly. Because of that history, my family would sometimes go to Native American gatherings. At one of those gatherings, another family from our hometown showed up. I'll call them the DeLawrence. Turns out their background was weirdly similar to ours. Their dad even worked for the same state agency as my father. The family was Steve, the dad, Janine, the mom, and their 5 kids. Jay, the oldest son, Jordy, the second oldest, Jenna, the oldest daughter, Sophie, the wild middle daughter, and Mara, the youngest. They lived in a house with a lot of bad history under it. The first house on that land had burned during a raid, and the family inside died. The second house was burned after a scarlet fever outbreak wiped out everyone living there. The third house had belonged to a religious leader, and locals eventually burned that one too, because they believed he was possessed, mostly because he had different beliefs and was pulling young people into his group. After that, the land just sat there for a long time. Nobody built on it again until around the late 1970s, when Steve put up the DeLawrence house. Jay and I ended up on the same basketball and baseball teams, so we started hanging out. The first time I went over to his house, he looked at me and said, "Just so you know, strange things happen here." I thought he was joking, so I gave him this look, and he added, "It's better if you just let things happen. If you react too much, it gets worse." I figured maybe his mom was a nudist, or one of his sisters liked throwing stuff at people. Something weird, sure, but normal weird. For a while, nothing happened. Not the first time I went there, not the next 10 times, maybe not even the next 20. Then, when Jay and I were around 12, we started playing music together. Not good music. Not even close. But I had a drum set and a bass, and Jay and Jordy had guitars and one microphone, so to us, it felt like we were basically a band. One day we were messing around, making noise, and I heard music coming from the girls' room. It sounded like a little piano or synth playing. We stopped. The music kept going. I thought one of his sisters was in there, so I walked over and opened the door. And there, floating above the bed, was this kid's toy called a magical musical machine. It was one of those colorful little music toys, kind of trendy at the time, and it could play pre-recorded songs. What it could not do, under any normal circumstances, was float in mid-air. It was just suspended there, playing music by itself. Jay moved fast. He shut the door and said, very calmly, "It's better to let it go." I was supposed to stay for dinner that night, maybe even sleep over, and I didn't want to run home scared, so I stayed. Later, Steve came home from work. He was a big, loud, fun-loving guy, the kind of man who would go skinny dipping in front of half the lake and not care one bit who saw him bobbing around out there. I guess I must have looked shaken, because he brought me out to the garage for what he called a man-to-man talk. I was only about 12, but he poured me a tiny shot of Jack Daniels. Not my first, sadly. My grandfather used to give me and my older brother little shots because he thought it would make men out of us. Steve looked at me and basically confirmed that, yes, odd things happened in the house. Then he asked me not to talk about it around town. After that, I spent a lot more time there, and it was almost like whatever was in that house had decided, well, he's seen it now. No point pretending. The piano near the kitchen would play when nobody was touching it. The girls would find drawings in their coloring books that none of them remembered making. Little things would move. Doors would open. You'd hear footsteps where there shouldn't have been footsteps. Nothing dramatic every single time. Just enough to remind you the house was awake. One summer, my family and the De Laurents went camping together. I thought maybe getting away from the house would make everything feel normal. It didn't. Things still happened. My older sister saw ripples moving across the lake when nobody was near that part of the water. Small items disappeared and turned up in strange places. Some of it could have been regular camping confusion, sure, but not all of it felt that way. On the last night, Janine took a picture of all the kids standing near the fire. It was a big, bright fire, throwing light everywhere. A couple of weeks later, she gave me a copy of the photo. My older brother looked at it and said, "Why are there 11 shadows behind you?" There were not 11 kids in the picture, but behind us, clear as anything, were 11 shadows. Years went by. Jay and I graduated. We went to colleges on opposite sides of the country, and life pulled us in different directions. Then things got worse. Steve died young, at home, while listening to music. Jay finished college and became a regional manager for Radio Shack. The last time I saw him, he had come back to our hometown, and we talked for a while. He'd been drinking, and eventually, he brought up the house. He said it was getting stranger. He and Jordy both thought so. 2 months later, Jay dropped dead at 24. Then Jordy was killed in a car accident about a year and a half after that. Sophie, the wild middle sister, was killed by her boyfriend. Janine died young too. After all of that, only Jenna and Mara were left. Jenna came to my sister's wedding years later, and we talked for maybe 45 minutes. Eventually, we talked about the house. I told her how sorry I was for everything her family had been through. She told me neither she nor Mara lived in that house anymore. Then she said something that stayed with me. She said she thought whatever had been in that house still visited her from time to time. And the way she said it, quiet and tired, made me believe her. You know, I've thought about this for a long time, and I keep coming back to something that people like Jason Valier and Dr. Alan Hines seem to circle around. Maybe what we call aliens are not really aliens in the way we imagine them. Maybe they are something older, something darker. Maybe demons is the word people used before we had words like spacecraft and extraterrestrial. I know that sounds heavy, but think about the way these stories usually go. People are taken against their will, usually at night. They feel paralyzed. Their memories are wiped, sometimes completely, sometimes with little broken pieces left behind. Some abductees say they were pulled right through walls, and that passing through felt like moving through warm, sticky liquid. That detail always stuck with me. It is strange in a way that feels too specific to ignore. There was also that story about the foreign diplomat visiting New York years ago. I cannot remember exactly where he was from, but he was traveling with several limousines and a police escort. They were crossing the Brooklyn Bridge when traffic stopped, and everyone saw this huge UFO hovering near a high-rise apartment building. There was a beam of light shining down on the building, and people claimed they saw bodies floating up into that light and into the craft. Not just one person saw it. Police officers, people in the motorcade, bystanders, a whole crowd. And I know it sounds wild, but part of me wonders if that is why governments are so secretive about all of this. Maybe they can explain aliens to the public, but telling people that something can come for them in their sleep and that nobody can really stop it, that is a whole different kind of terror. People ask why they do not just land on the White House lawn and introduce themselves. But when you go to the zoo, do you stop and explain yourself to the apes and chimps? Of course not. Maybe that is how they see us. Not as equals, but as something primitive. Hairless little creatures with tiny flashes of intelligence, still fighting wars, still killing first and asking questions later. I have heard stories about beings being killed too. There was one, supposedly, at Fort Dix in New Jersey. Military police encountered something on the base one night, ordered it to freeze, and when it made what looked like a threatening move, they shot it. Some people say that case was backed by documents. Others say you have to take it with a mountain of salt. A former intelligence officer, Ryland Daughter, talked about cases like that for years. I do not know what to believe entirely, but I know there is more to this than little green men dropping by for a visit. And the reason I care so much is because I saw something myself. I was 16 years old, delivering Sunday newspapers early one morning in 1989. It was still quiet out, the kind of quiet where the whole neighborhood feels asleep under a blanket. Then I saw it. There was this massive craft hovering over an electrical power station. I mean massive. It glowed fiery orange, and it wobbled in the air almost like a warped record spinning wrong. Then, all at once, it stopped wobbling. The color changed to blue, like the flame on a gas stove. It blinked once, maybe twice, and then shot straight up into the sky so fast it was just gone. No sound. None. But I felt it. My insides felt like they were going to burst. There was something dripping from the bottom of it too, almost like molten metal or glowing plasma. And before it took off, every animal in the area seemed to panic. Squirrels, birds, possums, skunks, everything was running away from where that craft hovered. When it launched upward, the force twisted the tops of the trees like a tornado had grabbed them. Green leaves came spinning down, some of them burning. Dust whipped up from the ground, and the wind moved through the street in this hard, sudden wave. I ran home faster than I have ever run in my life. I remember my legs pumping so hard, it felt like my heels were smacking behind me. I burst into the house, ran straight into my father's room, jumped onto his bed, and kept asking him what it was, what I had seen. What could do something like that? Later, I heard a patrol officer had seen it too. He had been a few blocks away, walking toward the area when it took off. He said the wind came rushing down the street so hard it blew the cap right off his head. For years, I barely told that story. People look at you differently when you say something like that. They think you are lying, or crazy, or trying to get attention. But now, with more people admitting UFOs are real, and more files coming out little by little, I do not feel as afraid to say it. Someone once told me that if I was that close to a craft that size, maybe it was not arriving. Maybe it was leaving. Maybe it had just dropped me off. Or maybe it was there to pick me up. I do have a strange scar on my upper left calf. One of those little scoop-shaped marks people talk about in abduction stories. I am not saying I was abducted, because if I was, I do not remember it. I only remember what I saw that morning, and I have never seen another UFO since. But that one moment changed the direction of my life. Ever since then, I have wanted to know what they are, where they come from, and what they want with us. Some people say Zeta Reticuli, 39 light-years away. Maybe. Maybe not. All I know is what I saw, and whatever it was real. want to explain this as clearly as I can. My shadow was on the wall, and only on the wall. That part matters. The other shapes in the photo were not casting shadows the way a normal object would. They were in front of my shadow, and to me, they looked like shadow beings. The phone I used was old. I mean really old. No SIM card, no service, no internet, nothing like that. I had to take the photo on that phone, then figure out how to get it uploaded through email after someone kindly explained it to me. Even when I took a photo of the photo, those shapes were still there in the image. There was a high-vis vest hanging above my head, and the figures appeared on either side of it. That is what I saw. But listen, this is not really about whether someone believes me or not. I know what happened that night. I know what I experienced. I am not sharing this because I need anyone to validate it for me. I share things like this because I know there are people out there who have experienced things they cannot easily explain. And when that happens, they get told they are losing their mind, or that they need to be fixed, silenced, medicated, or made to fit neatly back into the world's little box. I know what it feels like not to be believed. I know what it feels like to be laughed at, mocked, pushed aside, and treated like an outsider. And honestly, some of the loudest people talking about awareness are the same ones who make others feel most alone. The people who really understand are often the ones society has already rejected. They know. They recognize the weight of it. They know why it matters to speak about these things with honesty. To me, this is spiritual warfare. That is the truth as I understand it. Scripture says we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, and spiritual forces of wickedness in heavenly places. And when I look at the world, I see that struggle everywhere. I see it in war, bloodshed, hunger, poverty, division, confusion, and cruelty. I see it when brother turns against brother, parents against children, men against women, women against men, and everyone is pushed further apart. The chaos in the world does not come from nowhere. The silencing, the hatred, the violence, the confusion, the way people are driven into destruction, it all feels connected to something deeper. People dropping bombs, shooting each other, stabbing each other, drowning themselves in drugs or alcohol. Many of them are caught in that warfare and do not even realize it. So I ask myself, who is truly lost here? The people broken by what they have seen? The ones sent into battles they never truly understood? Or the darker forces feeding all that suffering from behind the curtain? Human beings are thrown into the grinder of pain, fighting battles that were never really ours to begin with. And when you know, you know. I am glad for the people who have never had to feel that kind of spiritual pressure. Truly, I am. I would not wish it on anyone. But those of us who have felt it do not need permission from anyone else to know what we are in. We know. Take care.